Chapter 60. Luo Jian flew into a rage out of humiliation. A huge cyan sword appeared in his right hand in an instant as he swung it towards Changyanghu's shoulder. Changyanghu's reaction was not slow either. His vigilance had already reached its peak when he was surrounded by these people. Just as Luo Jian summoned his saint weapon, a huge yellow axe immediately appeared in his hand. He fearlessly swung it towards Luo Jian's huge sword. Just as the two of them were about to fight, the surrounding people very sensibly retreated a few steps to avoid being affected. Bang! Luo Jian's huge sword and Changyanghu's huge axe collided with a loud sound of metal clashing. The two saint weapons collided in the air and immediately separated. Because of the powerful recoil, both of them could not stop themselves from retreating at the same time. Changyanghu retreated a full 4 or 5 steps before stabilizing himself, while Luo Jian only retreated a few steps before stabilizing himself. In this exchange, anyone with a discerning eye could see that Changyanghu was at a disadvantage. Although Luo Jian's wind-attributed saint weapon focused on speed and was relatively weaker in terms of attack, his strength had already reached the level of an intermediate saint. Even if Changyanghu's earth-attributed saint weapon was slightly stronger in terms of defense, he was still no match for Luo Jian. After all, Changyanghu had just become a saint. Luo Jian did not plan to let Changyanghu off so easily. His body flashed with a cyan light as gusts of wind constantly revolved around his body. Luo Jian arrived in front of Changyanghu at an extremely fast speed. His huge sword left behind a cyan light in the air as he chopped towards Changyanghu at an extremely fast speed. With his wind-attributed saint force, Luo Jian's speed was much faster than the others. Changyanghu's expression suddenly changed. Luo Jian's attack was so fast that he did not have any extra time to counterattack. In the end, he could only barely raise the huge axe in his hand to block. Changyanghu died. However, just as Changyanghu used the huge axe in his hand to block Luo Jian's huge sword, an angry roar rang out from the side. Ka Di Yun slashed towards Changyanghu with a huge sword in his hand, directly chopping at Changyanghu's right arm. The intense pain caused Changyanghu to groan. Ka Di Yun had clearly used a lot of strength in this attack, leaving a deep wound on Changyanghu's arm. Because of the huge injury to his arm, Changyanghu was unable to maintain the saint weapon in his hand. The huge axe once again turned into a beam of energy and disappeared in his hand. Luo Jian's eyes flashed with a sharp light. He once again swung the huge sword in his hand across Changyanghu's chest. The sharp tip of the sword easily cut through Changyanghu's uniform, leaving a deep wound on his chest. Immediately, a torrent of blood flowed out from his body, quickly dyeing the front of his uniform red. The intense pain caused the muscles on Changyanghu's face to twitch slightly, but he did not let out a single scream. Changyanghu, you didn't think that you would have such a day, did you? Luo Jian laughed loudly, his face filled with malice. The resentment he had for Changyanghu naturally would not be so easily resolved. He once again swung the huge sword in his hand, adding another wound to Changyanghu's body. Changyanghu's eyes were filled with resentment as he stared at Luo Jian. He angrily said, "Luo Jian, you useless thing. If you have the guts, go fight with my fourth brother. Let's see if he won't beat you until you're looking for your teeth on the ground." Hearing this, Luo Jian's face suddenly became gloomy. He immediately took a step forward and directly kicked at Changyanghu. Changyanghu's eyes flashed. Just as Luo Jian's foot was about to reach his face, he suddenly stretched out his left hand and firmly grabbed Luo Jian's foot. He then pulled back with all his strength. Luo Jian's body suddenly lost balance and directly fell to the ground. "Huh!" Changyanghu angrily shouted. His left hand formed a fist, and all the saint force in his body gathered on his fist. He then fiercely smashed at Luo Jian, who had fallen to the ground. Luo Jian's reaction was not slow. Just as his body fell to the ground, he immediately bounced up from the ground, narrowly dodging Changyanghu's full-strength punch. Bang! Changyanghu's fist directly smashed into the ground, creating a deep crater. His fist had already completely sunk into the ground. Chanyang-hu, you're courting death. Luo Jian's handsome face was pale with anger. He angrily shouted, and all the saint force of the wind attribute gathered on his fist. He then fiercely punched Chanyang, whose chest as fast as lightning. Chanyang, who spat out a mouthful of blood. His body was directly sent flying by Luo Jian's punch. He flew for a distance of 4 or 5 meters before crashing to the ground. Just as Luo Jian wanted to rush up and beat up Chanyang, who Cheng Mingxiang suddenly stopped in front of him and said, Luo Jian, it's enough to teach him a lesson. Our main target is Jianshen, not Chanyang-hu. Let's first ask him about Changyang Shoten's whereabouts. Luo Jian slowly nodded and did not say anything. If other people came out to stop him, he would definitely disdain them. However, Luo Jian did not want to offend Cheng Mingxiang. Cheng Mingxiang came in front of Chanyang-hu and sneered. Chanyang-hu, where is Changyang Shoten? Chanyang-hu struggled to get up from the ground. His face was now pale, and blood kept flowing from the corner of his mouth. Fortunately, his saint force was of the earth attribute, so his defense was stronger. Otherwise, if it was someone else, they would not have had the strength to get up from the ground. Chanyang-hu slowly glanced at the dozen youths and said in a deep voice, I don't know. Even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Although Chanyang-hu was very confident in Jinshen's strength, he could tell at a glance that the dozen youths were all saints. He did not think that Jianshen could defeat so many people by himself. Cheng Mingxiang's expression changed slightly, and he immediately became gloomy. He said coldly, Chanyang-hu, I'll ask you again. Where's Changyang Shoten? Chanyang-hu sneered. I said I don't know. Oomph. Cheng Mingxiang coldly snorted and punched Chanyang-hu in the face, knocking Chanyang-hu to the ground again. He said coldly, Are you going to tell me or not? Chanyang-hu's eyes burned with rage. He struggled to get up from the ground again and said angrily, I won't tell you. Cheng Mingxiang, you better kill me today. Otherwise, Chanyang-hu, swear that I will make you regret it in the future. Cheng Mingxiang's face showed a trace of disdain. Chanyang-hu, what qualifications do you have to say that? Just because of your identity as the young master of Chanyang Prefecture? My Huayan sect does not put a mere Chanyang Prefecture in our eyes. As soon as he finished speaking, Cheng Mingxiang's eyes flashed with a cold light. His right hand formed a fist, and a fiery red light flickered on his fist. He directly punched Chanyang-hu in the head and said angrily, Are you going to tell me or not? Chanyang-hu's head was broken and bleeding from Cheng Mingxiang's fist. Blood flowed from his forehead and quickly rolled down his resolute face, making him look incomparably fierce. I'll fight you to the death. Chanyang-hu could no longer bear it. A huge cyan axe appeared in his left hand, and he roared as he swung it at Cheng Mingxiang. A huge fiery red sword appeared in Cheng Mingxiang's hand, and he easily blocked Chanyang-hu's attack. Not to mention that Chanyang-hu was currently seriously injured, and he was using the axe in his left hand that he was not familiar with. Even if he was in his peak condition, he would definitely not be Cheng Mingxiang's opponent. Cheng Mingxiang looked at Chanyang-hu in disdain and said mockingly, Chanyang-hu, I advise you to obediently tell me the whereabouts of Changyang Shoten and save yourself from physical pain. Chanyang-hu gasped for breath. At this moment, he was surprisingly calm. He was very clear in his heart that if he continued to stay here, he would definitely be in danger. He carefully looked at the surrounding terrain, and after making some mental calculations, he immediately put away his saint weapon, turned around, and ran in the direction of the academy's field. This small forest was very remote. Usually, almost no one would pass by here, and what happened here would naturally not be known by the outside world. He believed that once he ran to a place with many people, Cheng Mingxiang and the others would definitely not dare to make a move. Moreover, he had many good friends in the academy. Although Chanyang-hu did not expect them to help him fight against Cheng Mingxiang, at least they could still report to the academy's teachers and the vice principal. Seeing that Chanyang-hu was actually running in the direction of the academy's field, Cheng Mingxiang's expression changed slightly, and he immediately shouted, Quickly stop him. The dozen or so youths standing behind him who had not made a move immediately rushed forward and quickly chased after Chang Yonghu. Cheng Mingxiang's body also turned into a sharp sword and shot toward Chang Yonghu at an extremely fast speed. Chang Yonghu was now seriously injured and simply could not outrun the crowd. In a short moment, the people behind him had already closed the distance by a lot. Looking at the rapidly approaching enemies behind him, Chang Yonghu understood that they would probably catch up to him before he could run out of the small forest. Thinking of this, Chang Yonghu gritted his teeth, and his advancing body suddenly stopped, and then ran in the opposite direction into the depths of the small forest. Chang Yonghu's sudden change of direction made everyone behind him feel very surprised, but immediately, a cold smile appeared on everyone's face, and the speed of the chase also slowed down. The group of people behind Chang Yonghu fanned out and chased after him unhurriedly. Beside Cheng Mingxiang, Luo Jin sneered and said, looking at the direction in which Chang Yonghu is running, he is most likely going to find Chang Yang Shoten. Cheng Mingxiang nodded slightly and said, it makes sense. It seems that Chang Yang Shoten is really not in the academy. Chang Yang, who was running with all his strength in front. Now, not only was his forehead covered in blood, even his school uniform was dyed red by blood, looking incomparably miserable. He did not know where Jianshan was, but he knew that in the depths of the small forest, there was a hillside that was not high. The hillside's terrain was complex, and the trees were much more lush, very suitable for hiding. In a situation where there was no hope of returning to the academy, Chang Yonghu's only way was to use the complex terrain of the hillside to shake off the group of people behind him. However, Chang Yonghu might have forgotten that in the morning, when Jianshan finished teaching him about skills, he also left in the direction he was going now. Under a waterfall on the hillside, a young man wearing a school uniform was practicing swordsmanship on the grass not far from the pool. The young man's figure was relatively thin, and his long black hair reached his waist. He had a very handsome and resolute face, and a pair of eyes that shone with a sharp light like a sword, making people unable to look directly at him. In the young man's hand was a 4-foot-long, 2 fingers wide, silver-white, thin long sword. On the sword's surface, there were 2 large words written in flamboyant calligraphy, breeze. The young man stood there quietly, holding the long sword in his hand. The tip of the sword slanted to the ground. His whole body was as motionless as a mountain. At this moment, a gleam of light flashed through the young man's eyes. At this moment, his body began to move without any warning. His body arched as he rapidly moved on the spot. The silver-white sword in his hand had completely turned into a white blur. Countless sword shadows constantly flashed through the white blur, leaving only afterimages in the air. The young man's mysterious footwork allowed him to move back and forth in a fixed area. His movements were like moving clouds and flowing water. He was extremely agile, just like a cunning rabbit. The speed at which he stabbed his sword was unbelievably fast, making it impossible for the naked eye to catch him. Chapter 61. Jianshan quickly moved across the grass. The light wind sword in his hand had already turned into a silver ray of light as he stabbed in all directions. His sword technique was swift and fierce. Following Jianshan's quick movements, the wind brought about by his movements caused some of the leaves on the ground to flutter in the air. They looked like butterflies dancing around Jianshan. At this time, Jianshan's sword technique suddenly changed. Even though his sword technique was still as fast as before, every time he stabbed out, the tip of the sword would tremble at an extremely high frequency. The trembling of the sword tip formed a blurry image that normal people wouldn't be able to see clearly. After a moment, the sword in Jianshan's hand suddenly stopped moving. However, even after such a long period of intense movement, Jianshan didn't seem to be panting at all. His breathing was still as steady as before. At the same time, the moment Jianshan stopped, the surrounding leaves that were fluttering in the air also shattered and turned into powder. Only a small portion of the leaves remained intact. The only difference was that half of the leaves had the word sword carved on it. Although the size of the word was different, it took up the entire leaf. The other half of the leaves had the word sword carved on it, but it was either unclear or incomplete. If other people were to see this scene, they would definitely be shocked to the point that their mouths would be wide open. This scene was simply too shocking. It must be known that in the scene just now, the leaves were fluttering chaotically in the air. Countless leaves were constantly intertwining with one another. Just looking at one of the leaves would cause one to be dazzled, not to mention using a sharp sword to carve a word on it. Most importantly, the leaves were very thin and easily broken. Using a sharp sword to carve a word on such a thin leaf without leaving a single mark on it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. If Jinshin's actions were to be made known to others, then his name would definitely spread across the entire Tianyuan continent in a very short period of time. Looking at the leaves and leaf powder that slowly drifted down from the sky, a smile gradually appeared on Jinshin's face. He muttered to himself, "Although the speed of the sword is much slower, my control over the sword is so strong that it can't be compared to my previous life. It's as if the sword has completely become my left and right arm. Perhaps this is the advantage of a saint weapon in this world." At this moment, Jinshin's ears twitched slightly. His eyes narrowed, and he raised his head to look at the forest in front of him. The silver-white sword in his hand also disappeared. Not long after, the trees where Jinshin was looking at began to tremble slightly. Following that, a person wearing a school uniform and covered in blood staggered out of the forest. When Jinshin's gaze fell on the person's clothes, he already knew that this person was a student of Kargath Academy. However, the blood on the person's clothes made Jinshin feel very puzzled. There were no magical beasts in the surroundings, so how could he be injured? Moreover, Kargath Academy had a clear rule that students could spar with each other, but it was forbidden to fight to the death. However, when Jinshin's gaze fell on the student's face, his face suddenly froze. At this moment, his gaze suddenly froze. He stared straight at the youth whose face was half covered in blood with a trace of disbelief in his eyes. "Big brother." Jinshin let out a cry of surprise. His voice was filled with astonishment. Following that, his body slightly swayed, and in a short instant, he had already crossed the distance of 30 meters and arrived in front of the youth who was covered in blood. Seeing the several hideous and terrifying wounds on the youth's body and the already damaged flesh on his forehead, Jinshin's eyes suddenly became bloodshot. He said in alarm, "Big brother, what happened to you? Who injured you like this?" Following his voice, a strong killing intent was emitted from Jinshin's body. Other than his mother, Jinshin was the second person who truly cared about his big brother Changyang, who since he had come to this world. This was because Changyang who completely treated him as a younger brother. Jinshin could still clearly remember that when he had first come to Kargath Academy, his big brother Changyang, who had brought him around the academy and introduced him to the rules of the academy as well as other matters. Afterwards, he had even taken great risks and spared no effort to travel 10 kilometers to kill a Class 1 magical beast in the forest. His goal was to give him a Class 1 monster core as a meeting gift. Although Class 1 magical beasts were no threat to Jinshin in the slightest, Changyang, who did not have as much experience and powerful battle prowess as him. With only the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force, it was definitely not easy for him to kill a Class 1 magical beast. Later on, when he had fought with Kadiyun in the arena, his big brother Changyang, who had considered his own lack of strength and took the initiative to fight Kadiyun in the arena. Jinshin could clearly feel that his big brother Changyang, whose concern for him had always been from the bottom of his heart. Now, in Jinshin's heart, Changyang, who had already become a close relative. In his previous life, Jinshin had been born in a time of war. When he was still an infant, his parents had been killed by the enemy because of the war. In that life, Jinshin had no relatives and had never experienced the feeling of family. Since the heavens had arranged such a good fate for him in this life, Jinshin treasured it very much. In Jinshin's heart, Changyang, who had long occupied an important position second only to his mother by Yuntian. Seeing Changyang, who beaten to such a state, the anger in Jinshin's heart had already reached an unprecedented height. With his eyesight, he could tell with a single glance that these wounds were caused by someone. Seeing Jinshin suddenly appear in front of him, Changyang, whose expression was also stunned. However, his expression suddenly changed, and he anxiously said, Fourth brother, "Ew, why are you here? Quickly, quickly leave this place. They'll catch up soon." Chanyang, whose face was full of anxiety. He had never thought that he would actually meet Jianshan here. Jianshan's face became extremely gloomy. He said in a deep voice, "Big brother, who beat you up like this?" Anyone could hear the anger in Jianshan's voice that he was trying to suppress. Chanyang, who pushed Jianshan's body with both hands. His tone was full of anxiety. "Fourth brother, don't ask so much. Quickly leave here and take a detour back to the academy. Otherwise, they will never let you go." Although he knew that Jianshan was very strong and could defeat an intermediate saint, Chanyang, who would never think that Jianshan alone could face more than a dozen students with the strength of saints. Moreover, one of them was Cheng Mingxiang, who had reached the strength of an advanced saint. Jianshan's body stood there like a stone sculpture. No matter how hard Chanyang, who tried to push him, he could not move. Jianshan's eyes flashed with extremely strong, killing intent. He stared at the woods in front of him with extremely sharp eyes. More than a dozen people in school uniforms appeared where Jianshan was looking at. The ones walking in front were Cheng Mingxiang and Luo Jian, whom Jianshan knew. As soon as they saw Jianshan, Cheng Mingxiang, Luo Jian, and the others showed a trace of joy on their faces. Luo Jian even laughed out loud and said, "Changyang Shoten, we've finally found you. Let's see where you can run to this time." More than a dozen young people quickly stepped forward without any instructions and immediately surrounded Jianshan and Chanyang Hu. Chanyang Hu's expression drastically changed when he saw that he had been surrounded again. His face immediately became ugly, and he let out a long sigh. He did not say anything. Facing more than a dozen aggressive people, Jianshan did not show the slightest fear on his face. He was still so calm. It seemed that he did not put these people who were not weaker than him in his eyes at all. Jianshan's face was gloomy. His sharp eyes swept across the faces of the more than a dozen young people around him. Anyone who was swept by his eyes felt a faint pain on their faces. Then a chill rose from the bottom of their hearts, as if Jianshan's eyes were completely sharp swords. "Who hurt my big brother?" Jianshan's tone suddenly changed. He shouted, "Stand out." As he spoke, a huge aura emanated from his body. Facing more than a dozen people who were not weaker than him, Jianshan did not show the slightest fear. Instead, his aura was high, and he had a great momentum of not giving up. Jianshan's shout, coupled with the huge aura emanating from his body, frightened the group of people opposite him, including Cheng Mingxiang, to take a step back. After all, Jianshan was a person who had experienced the baptism of slaughter. He was far from being comparable to a group of immature students. Realizing that he had been scared away by Jianshan's shout, Cheng Mingxiang's face turned blue with anger. He, a senior saint, was actually scared away by a freshman who had just become a saint a few days ago. This was simply unacceptable to him. "Chanyang Shoten, you're courting death." Cheng Mingxiang flew into a rage out of humiliation. With a loud shout, a huge fiery red sword suddenly appeared in his hand. With a fiery red light, the huge sword pierced toward Jianshan's chest with a burst of hot aura. Looking at the incoming huge sword, Jianshan's eyes flashed with a strong killing intent. Immediately, the light wind sword appeared in his right hand and met Cheng Mingxiang's huge sword with lightning speed. Ding! Following a crisp sound, the tips of the two swords, which were completely out of proportion, came into contact with each other in an inconceivable manner. Looking at the two swords touching each other, Cheng Mingxiang's eyes revealed a trace of surprise. Whether it was the huge sword in his hand or the long sword in Jianshan's hand, the tip of the sword was very small. At such a fast speed, for the two swords to touch each other steadily was definitely not something an ordinary person could do. And to be able to do this, one had to be incomparably powerful. Moreover, their control over their saint weapons had already reached an extraordinary level. However, for Jianshan to be able to do this with just the strength of a saint, Cheng Mingxiang found it hard to believe. It wasn't that he didn't think that this was a coincidence, but when he saw Jianshan's calm expression, he immediately dispelled that thought. What made Cheng Mingxiang even more surprised was the sword in Jinshin's hand. This sword was just too small. In his eyes, this sword was like an enlarged version of an embroidery needle. It was 4 feet long and 2 fingers wide. It was as thin as a piece of paper. Anyone who saw it at first glance would think that this sword was very fragile, as if it could be broken with just a little bit of strength. Cheng Mingxiang dared to swear that this was the first time he had seen such a delicate sword. In fact, he had never even heard of it before. This was because in the Tian Yuan continent, everyone used heavy weapons. Condensing one's own saint weapon into a heavy weapon had already become a habit that was deeply planted in everyone's heart. Chapter 62. Cheng Mingxiang's expression became serious. At this moment, facing a new student who had just become a saint a few days ago, this was the first time he had to face him properly. Cheng Mingxiang, since you've injured my big brother, then don't even think about leaving here unscathed. Jinshin coldly stared at Cheng Mingxiang. Cheng Mingxiang coldly snorted and arrogantly said, "Changyang Shoten, I admit that I've underestimated you. But if you want to keep me here, then you don't have the ability to do so." Jinshin sneered as he looked at Cheng Mingxiang with a trace of disdain. "Whether I have the ability or not, you'll know once you try." As soon as his voice fell, Jinshin's wrist shook slightly. Under his skillful control, the light wind sword broke free from the stalemate with Cheng Mingxiang's greatsword and fiercely slammed into Cheng Mingxiang's greatsword. Clang! With the sound of metal colliding, Cheng Mingxiang's greatsword was directly knocked to the side by the light wind sword. Jinshin's greatsword was only 2 fingers thick, but it contained a frightening amount of power. Cheng Mingxiang's hand that was holding the greatsword was numb from the impact. At the same time, Jinshin's light wind sword left a trail of silver light in the air as it pierced towards Cheng Mingxiang's chest at an extremely fast speed. Cheng Mingxiang was shocked. Jinshin's sword was so fast that he couldn't even see it coming. In his eyes, all he could see was a silver streak of light shooting towards him at an incredible speed. It was so fast that he didn't even have time to react. The tip of the light wind sword pierced through Cheng Mingxiang's uniform and directly into his chest. But under Jinshin's control, it didn't go too deep. When Cheng Mingxiang felt a sharp pain in his chest, he immediately reacted and quickly retreated. As he retreated, Jinshin pulled out the sword that had pierced his chest. Cheng Mingxiang looked at his chest that was stained red with blood. His eyes revealed a trace of fear. At this moment, he couldn't help but think of Jinshin's sword that was so fast that he couldn't dodge it. He swore that since he was a child, this was the fastest sword he had ever seen. At the same time, he was also shocked by Jinshin's strength. He really couldn't understand how a new student who had just become a saint could have such strength. Jinshin didn't plan on letting Cheng Mingxiang go so easily. Using a mysterious footwork, he appeared in front of Cheng Mingxiang like a ghost. The light wind sword in his hand turned into a silver ray of light as it slashed across Cheng Mingxiang's chest. "Ah!" Cheng Mingxiang let out a miserable scream, only to see that there was already a bloody wound on his chest. The wound spread from the left side of his chest all the way to the right side. The wound was so deep that bones could be seen. Bright red blood surged out, and in the blink of an eye, his school uniform was dyed red. Jinshin's eyes were still filled with anger. He continued to dance with the light wind sword, adding more and more wounds to Cheng Mingxiang's body. Cheng Mingxiang's mouth continued to let out blood-curdling screams. The arrogance on his face had long since disappeared. Facing Jinshin's extremely fast sword technique, he simply couldn't dodge. His body didn't even have the strength to resist. Jinshin's sword technique was simply too fast in his eyes. Every stab seemed to have turned into a ray of light, making it impossible for him to see clearly. Although his Saint Force was much stronger than Jinshin's, he didn't even have the opportunity to use it. He had completely lost the ability to fight back. The wounds on Cheng Mingxiang's body continued to increase. Each wound looked hideous and terrifying, so deep that the bones could be seen. His originally clean school uniform was not only cut with a few long tears, but the entire set of school uniform was gradually dyed blood red. Moreover, The red range was constantly expanding. Seeing Chang Mingxiang, who was the strongest amongst them, unable to resist at all, the surrounding students were all dumbstruck. They stared blankly at Chang Mingxiang, who constantly let out cries of agony. Their faces were filled with disbelief as they stared at Chang Mingxiang, who had completely overturned everything they knew. Luo Jian was the first to react, although he was also shocked by Jinshan's strength. When he saw that there were more than 10 of his companions around him who were at least primary saints, he couldn't help but feel emboldened. He immediately roared, "Everyone attack together! No matter how strong he is only one person. Don't tell me that with so many of us here, we are afraid of him." Saying that, a light green greatsword appeared in Luo Jian's hand. With a roar, he took the lead and charged towards Jinshan. Hearing Luo Jian's words, the other dozen or so students came back to their senses. Looking at their companions, the fear in their hearts from Jinshan's display of strength was swept away. Next, huge swords, axes, sabers, spears, and many other weapons appeared in the hands of the dozen or so people. They then aggressively charged towards Jinshan. Jinshan's eyes flashed with a cold light. Facing more than 10 people who were not any weaker than him, he did not retreat. Instead, he took the initiative to charge into their encirclement. The light wind sword in his hand turned into a silver light as it pierced towards the chest of one of the students. Jinshan's light wind sword easily pierced through the student's chest. His sword was so fast that it was not something that a group of inexperienced students could block. Go to hell. At the same time, Jinshan was also surrounded by more than 10 people. More than 10 saint weapons emitted strong energy fluctuations as they attacked Jinshan from all directions. Jinshan's face revealed a trace of a cold smile. The light wind sword in his hand emitted a misty sword aura as it emitted a strong and sharp sword chi. Following that, Jinshan's right arm turned into a blur as he stabbed the light wind sword in all directions with lightning speed. Every time he stabbed out, Jinshan would accurately hit a weapon. In this short period of time, Jinshan had already stabbed out more than 10 times. Ding, 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 ding. A series of clanging sounds of metal colliding rang out in the air. The sounds had already merged into one, as if there was only one sound. When the light wind sword in Jinshan's hand collided with the saint weapons, the faces of those who were attacking Jinshan, including Luo Jian, changed. They all took a few steps back as their hands that were holding onto their weapons began to tremble. Although Jinshan's sword looked very small, the power that was hidden within it was very large. When these 10 people first collided with Jinshan's sword, their arms were already numb from the impact of the collision. Even after blocking the attacks of more than 10 people, Jinshan's expression didn't change at all. His movements didn't stop at all. His feet moved in a mysterious pattern as he shuttled back and forth between the dozen people. The light wind sword in his hand danced at an extremely fast speed, gradually forming a silvery, white sword light in front of him. Within the sword light, one could faintly see thousands of sword images floating in the air before disappearing in the blink of an eye. Following Jinshan's ghostly movements, screams of pain could be heard coming from the battlefield. The miserable screams caused those who were not mentally strong to feel a chill run down their spine. The blood-soaked Changyang, who stood to one side in a daze. He stared blankly at Jinshan, who constantly changed positions and moved around like a ghost, and at the miserable cries of over a dozen students. At that moment, his mind seemed to have stopped working. He had completely lost the ability to think. At this moment, the 10 students were all lying on the ground, their pale faces filled with pain. Originally, they were wearing a clean and pristine uniform, but now there were multiple tears. Each tear was dripping with blood, staining the school uniform red. Moreover, as the white light continued to flash on their bodies, the number of wounds on their bodies quickly increased. Initially, it was the upper half of their bodies, but it gradually spread to their thighs. In the end, their entire bodies were covered with terrifying wounds. The blood that was gushing out from their wounds was like a fountain, quickly turning them into people covered in blood. Jianshan quickly circled around the 10 students. In his hands, the light wind sword continuously slashed at the bodies of the 10 students, causing blood and torn clothes to fly into the air. Changyang, whose injuries had greatly affected Jianshan's heart. Towards these 10 students from the same school, Jianshan did not kill them, but he would definitely not let them off so easily. If these 10 people were not from the same school as Jianshan, and if Jianshan was not worried about bringing too much trouble to his family, he would definitely not hesitate to kill them. Senior Changyang Shoten, spare me, I won't dare to do it again. Senior Changyang Shoten, please let us off this time. We won't dare to do it again. Finally, someone could no longer bear the hellish torture and begged for mercy in a pleading tone. With someone taking the lead, the people behind began to beg for mercy one by one. However, there were still a few stubborn people who gritted their teeth and persisted. It was not that they did not think of running away, but whether it was their thighs or their right arms, they were all covered with terrifying wounds. Even the slightest movement would cause them to grit their teeth in pain, not to mention running away. At the very least, they did not have the willpower to endure this kind of heart-wrenching pain. Jianshan gradually stopped. His face was still as cold as before. His face was not red, and he was not panting. However, the light wind sword in his hand was already stained with blood. Jianshan's body was like a tall and straight mountain as he stood in the middle of the field. His pair of eyes seemed to be able to steal a person's soul as they flashed with a cold light. He slowly swept his gaze over the 10 students lying on the ground and said, "I can let you go, but tell me, who was it that injured my big brother?" It was young Master Cheng, Luo, Jian, and Kadin. Yes, it was the 3 of them who injured Changyang, who was injured by the 3 of them. We did not even make a move. The 10 youths scrambled to be the first to speak, as if they were afraid that Jianshan would be dissatisfied if they were too slow. At this moment, they no longer had any thoughts of taking revenge on Jianshan, and some of them even regretted participating in this mission. Among them, only half of them had their cores stolen by Jianshan in the forest. The other half had no enmity with Jianshan and were only gathered by Cheng Mingxiang. Jianshan's eyes flashed with a cold light as he turned to look at Cheng Mingxiang, Luo Jian, and Ka Diyun. His eyes flashed with killing intent. Chapter 63. Changyang Shoten, what are you doing? If you know what's good for you, you'd better let me go and I'll let bygones be bygones. Otherwise, just wait for my Huayun sex revenge. Cheng Mingxiang shouted. Seeing Jianshan's current appearance, even an idiot could guess that Jianshan wasn't planning on letting them go so easily. Right now, Cheng Mingxiang only wanted to leave this place as quickly as possible. As for revenge, there would be plenty of opportunities in the future. Jianshan coldly snorted and said, "Letting you go? It won't be that easy." Hearing these words, Cheng Mingxiang and the other two's faces suddenly changed. Ka Diyun's face darkened as he said, "Changyang Shoten, we did injure your big brother Changyang but now that you've injured us, let's cancel each other out." Jianshan slowly walked towards the 3 of them, his light wind sword emitting a sharp sword chi. It looked as if the light wind sword was wrapped in a silvery white aura that flickered in and out of existence. Cancel each other out? How could it be that easy? Today, the 3 of you will leave behind an arm. If you dare to attack us again in the future, I'll take your life. As he spoke, Jianshan had already arrived in front of Ka Diyun. The light wind sword in his hand emitted a beautiful silver light as it swept across Ka Diyun's right shoulder like a bolt of lightning. Ka Diyun let out a miserable scream. The intense pain caused his face to become completely distorted. His face had already become as white as paper without a trace of blood. From his right arm, blood spurted out like a fountain. His entire right arm had already been separated from his body and fell to the ground. Jianshan's sword had directly cut off Ka Diyun's right arm. Cheng Mingxiang and Luo Jian's faces suddenly changed. Their facial muscles trembled at the same time as they stared in horror at Ka Diyun, whose right arm had been cut off and who was still screaming miserably. Their faces had become incomparably pale, without a trace of blood. The 10 students who were lying on the ground looked at Jianshan with eyes full of fear. Jinshin's actions were completely out of their expectations. None of them would have thought that Jinshin would be so ruthless as to cut off someone's arm without hesitation. This scene had scared them to the point that their hearts were filled with apprehension. Each and every one of them looked at Jinshin with eyes full of fear. At this moment, they were secretly rejoicing that they had not made a move against Changyang-hu. Otherwise, they would have never doubted that Jinshin would cut off their own arm. After cutting off Chang Mingxiang's arm, Jinshin acted as if he had just done something insignificant. His expression did not change in the slightest. Whether it was the bloody scene or Kadyun's miserable cries of pain, it did not affect his state of mind. Then, Jinshin looked at Luo Jian and slowly walked towards him with a blood-stained light wind sword. Seeing Jinshin approach, Luo Jian's eyes finally revealed a look of fear. Resisting the pain from his wound, he desperately slid his four limbs backwards at a snail's pace as he cried out in alarm. Changyang Shoten, what are you doing? Don't come over, don't come over. Jinshin leisurely walked in front of Luo Jian and looked at him with a cold gaze. There was no trace of pity in his eyes as he slowly raised the light wind sword in his hand. Seeing Jinshin raise the silver sword in his hand, Luo Jian's expression was completely replaced with fear. He no longer had the arrogance from before and begged, Changyang Shoten, don't. I beg you, don't cut off my arm. If you let me go this time, I, Luo Jian, swear that I will repay you in the future. Jinshin did not move at all. The light wind sword in his hand turned into a silver light, and under Luo Jian's terrified and disbelieving gaze, it cut off his arm with lightning speed. Following a miserable scream, Luo Jian's right arm fell off from his shoulder. Blood gushed out from the wound and sprayed out from the wound. Changyang Shoten, I will definitely not let you go. Luo Jian's expression became extremely fierce as he roared with a heart-wrenching voice. His eyes were faintly red as he looked at Jinshin with a gaze full of hatred and resentment. Jinshin ignored Luo Jian's roar and continued to walk towards Chang Mingxiang. Chang Mingxiang's face had already become incomparably pale. Right now, his heart was filled with regret. If he had known that Jinshin was so strong earlier, he would not have brought only a dozen saints to take revenge on Jinshin. Otherwise, he would not have ended up in such a sorry state. Looking at Jinshin, who was walking towards him, Chang Mingxiang suppressed the fear in his heart and forced himself to calm down. Changyang Shoten, if you don't want your family to... Just when Chang Mingxiang reached there, Jinshin's face changed slightly. A vicious light flashed through his eyes, and with a sway of his body, he arrived before Chang Mingxiang like a ghost. Before Chang Mingxiang could finish his sentence, Jinshin swung his sword and cut off Chang Mingxiang's right arm. Chang Mingxiang let out a muffled groan as his expression became one of pain. Unlike Luo Jian and Kadyun, he did not let out a scream as his voice was forcefully suppressed in his throat. However, from the way his face was completely distorted, one could see how much pain he was in. Jinshin coldly looked at the three of them and coldly snorted, "Today, I will temporarily break your wall. If there is a next time, I will directly take your life. Don't think that I am speaking without thinking. I am a man of my word." After saying this, Jinshin's sharp gaze swept over the other dozen students present. Every student who was swept by Jinshin's gaze had their heads lowered in fear. At this moment, after witnessing Jinshin's ruthless methods, they did not dare to have the slightest thought of revenge in their hearts. Jinshin looked at the blood-stained light wind sword in his hand. With a thought, the blood on the light wind sword suddenly began to flow towards the tip of the sword. Finally, all of the blood gathered together and dripped onto the ground. In the blink of an eye, the light wind sword that was originally covered in blood once again became incomparably bright silver. After retrieving the light wind sword, Jinshin walked in front of his elder brother, Changyang-hu. Looking at the bloodied Changyang-hu, Jinshin's cold gaze immediately softened. With a slightly concerned tone, he said, "Elder brother, let's go back." Changyang-hu blankly nodded his head. Right now, the light in his eyes was still sluggish. He still hadn't recovered from a scene that had just happened. Perhaps the scene that had happened in front of him was too hard for him to accept. Jianxin supported the bloodied Changyang who as they walked along a secluded path back to the dormitory. Even so, along the way, they still startled quite a few people. Soon, the news of Changyang whose injuries began to spread throughout the academy. Not long after Jianxin returned to the dormitory, the bloodied Cheng Mingxiang and a dozen others supported each other as they struggled to walk out from the depths of the forest on the east side of the academy. As soon as they appeared in front of the students, they immediately caused a wave of shock, especially when they saw Cheng Mingxiang, Luo Jian, and Ka Diyun's severed arms. Everyone who saw this scene widened their eyes, their faces filled with disbelief. The news of Cheng Mingxiang and a dozen others being injured spread like wildfire throughout the entire Kargath Academy. This matter was immediately reported to the vice principal, Bai In. When Vice Principal Bai In heard that Cheng Mingxiang and a few others had their arms severed, he took this matter very seriously and immediately rushed to the Academy's infirmary. When Bai In arrived at the Academy's infirmary, a large group of students who had heard the news had already gathered outside of the infirmary. Vice President Bai In pushed through the crowd of students and directly squeezed into the Medical Administration Department. He saw that in the Medical Administration Department's large bed, there were more than a dozen students covered in blood lying on it. And in the center of the room, two middle-aged men and a middle-aged woman were closing their eyes slightly, their hands flat on top of three of the students. A milky white light was emitted from their hands, enveloping the three students. Enveloped by the milky white light, the terrifying wounds on the bodies of the three students were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The healing speed was simply inconceivable. In just a few breaths of time, the wounds on the bodies of the three students had completely disappeared. When the wounds on their bodies disappeared, the complexions of the three students clearly improved. There was no longer the slightest bit of pain on their faces. Instead, their faces were filled with relief. Even so, from the depths of their eyes, one could still see traces of fear. After treating the three students, the two men and one woman slightly bowed to Bai In and then threw themselves into the treatment of the remaining students. The vice principal's face was unsightly as he slowly swept his gaze over the remaining students, especially when his gaze landed on Cheng Mingxiang and the other two who had lost their right arms. His face became even more gloomy. In a deep voice, he asked, "What is going on? Who injured you like this? Could it be those outsiders who were passing by? Humph! Don't they know that this area is my Kargath Academy's territory? They actually dared to injure my students in our Kargath Academy's territory. How preposterous!" Bai's face was filled with anger. Obviously, he already believed that Cheng Mingxiang and the others were injured by some outsiders who were passing by Kargath Academy. Vice Principal, it was Changyang Shoten. We were all injured by Changyang Shoten. A student said in a weak voice. Yes, Vice Principal, you must seek justice for us. Not only did Changyang Shoten seriously injure us, he even chopped off the arms of young Master Cheng and the other to Vice Principal. Bayan was stunned when he heard that, and he felt disbelief in his heart. Among these students, even the weakest was a primary saint. Moreover, there were several intermediate saints and one advanced saint. Even if they encountered someone with the strength of a great saint, they would definitely be able to put up a fight. But what he couldn't believe was that so many of them had actually been beaten black and blue by a new student who had just advanced to the saint realm a few days ago. This moved Bayan, and he felt that it was extremely inconceivable. After confirming the authenticity of this matter, Bayan's face immediately became grave. Finally, with a heavy heart, he directly went to the top of the tower to find the vice principal of the academy. This matter was really too big. It was far from something that Bayan could solve. When Bayan roughly told the vice principal of the matter, the vice principal lost his usual steadiness. With a face full of shock, he stood up from his chair and said, "What? What you said is true. Cheng Mingxiang, Luo Jian, and Ka Diyun's arms were all chopped off by Changyang Shoten." "Yes, vice principal. I personally went to see them. Their arms were indeed chopped off," Bayan said with a serious face. "AI." The vice principal sighed heavily and said, "This is troublesome. Chanyang Shoten is too impulsive. I don't care about the Kadi family and the Luo family, but the Huayan sect is not something that Chanyang Prefecture can provoke. Chapter 64. After a moment of silence, the principal said, "You're right. Chanyang Shoten must be protected. Bayan, you stay in the academy and stabilize this matter for the time being. I need to immediately make a trip to Chanyang Prefecture. Otherwise, once the experts of the Huayan sect arrive at the academy, things will be terrible." Afterwards, the dean did not go through the main door. He directly leaped out of the window of the tower. Then, like a large bird, he rose into the sky at an extremely fast speed and flew into the distance. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared at the end of the horizon. Watching the principal disappear into the horizon, Bayan sighed and muttered, "This time, Chanyang Shoten has really caused too much trouble. If he had only injured a few of them, things wouldn't have ended up like this." But he actually cut off Cheng Mingxiang's arm. Although it's not impossible for Cheng Mingxiang's arm to recover, his condition is just too harsh. A 7th-class Radiant Saint Master is not someone the Huayan sect can afford. At this moment, the matter of Cheng Mingxiang and the other two having their arms cut off by Jianshan had already spread throughout the entire Kargath Academy. Everyone was talking about this matter. As the truth of this matter gradually spread among the students, Jianshan's strength once again shocked all the teachers and students of the Kargath Academy. While the academy was in an uproar over this matter, Jianshan was sitting cross-legged in his room with his head lowered in thought. When he had cut off the arms of Cheng Mingxiang and the other two, Jianshan had already realized that he had probably provoked a huge problem. However, he did not feel the slightest bit of regret. Now, Jianshan was quietly thinking about how he should deal with the revenge from the three families. A day passed by very quickly. Evening. Dong dong dong. A series of knocks came from Jianshan's door. Hearing this, Jianshan, who was sitting cross-legged on his bed, slowly opened his eyes. Lowering his head to look at the Class 1 monster cores that had already disappeared without a trace, he inwardly sighed. Afterwards, he looked towards the door and said, "Who is it?" "Chanyang Shoten, I am Vice Principal Bayan." Bayan's familiar voice came from outside the door. Jianshan immediately got off his bed and opened the door. He saw the white-robed Vice Principal Bayan standing straight outside the door. However, Bayan's complexion was not very good. "Vice Principal, what's the matter?" Jianshan opened his mouth and asked. His tone was extremely calm. Although he had already realized something, it did not cause the slightest fluctuation in his calm. Vice Principal Bayan looked at Jianshan with a complicated expression on his face. He faintly sighed and said, "Chanyang Shoten, pack your things and immediately come with me to the principal's office." "Oh," Jianshan faintly replied. Afterwards, he did not say anything and silently returned to the dormitory to pack his things. Jianshan did not have many things to pack. He put some of his own medicine into his space belt and then followed by into the only tower in the center of the academy. "Hey, look, isn't that Chanyang Shoten?" "That's right. Look at how he's together with the vice principal. He's probably going to be severely punished." When passing by the field, the students who recognized Jianshan immediately focused their attention on him and started discussing. Jianshan turned a deaf ear to the discussions around him. He followed Vice Principal Bayan and quickly arrived at the tower in the center of the academy. Then, he directly went to the top of the tower and entered the principal's office. There were two old men sitting at a round table in the dean's office. One of them was the dean of Kargath Academy, while the other old man was wearing a long green robe. His long black hair was simply tied up and casually fell behind his back. The old man in the green robe looked ordinary, as if he was just an ordinary old man. "Principal, Chanyang Shoten has been brought here." Vice Principal Bayan slightly bowed and said. Hearing this, the principal's gaze immediately fell on Jianshan. Then he said in a flat tone, "Bayan, you may leave." "Yes." Soon Bayan walked out. Now, only Jianshan, the principal of Kargath Academy, and the old man in the green robe were left in the office. Ever since Jianshan entered, his gaze fell on the old man in the green robe. Jianshan was no stranger to this old man. He was the housekeeper of Chanyang Prefecture. Changbo, why are you here?" Jianshan looked at the old man in the green robe and asked. Changbo looked at Jianshan with a complicated gaze. He let out a long sigh and said, "Fourth young master, we all know about your achievements in the academy these days. Both your parents are very happy with your performance. But this time, you were too impulsive." Jianshan naturally understood what Changbo was talking about. He firmly said, "Changbo, I don't regret it. They only have themselves to blame for this. My elder brother didn't offend them at all, but they actually beat him to such a state. If I were given a chance to start over, I would still choose to do the same." Changbo inwardly sighed and said, "Fourth young master, I don't object to your way of doing things. After all, on the Tianyuan continent, strength is everything. Although they're not as strong as you didn't consider the power behind them. If it was just the Cardi clan and the Luo clan, our Changyang prefecture could barely deal with them. However, Cheng Mingxiang is the only son of the current sect master of the Huayan sect. In the kingdom of Jesson, the Huayan sect is second only to the imperial family. It is not an existence that our Changyang prefecture can provoke. Changyang Shoten, the Huayan sect, is extremely powerful. Although it is not as powerful as the imperial family, it is still feared by the imperial family. Of the 6 great experts of the kingdom of Jesson, 2 of them are from the Huayan sect," the dean solemnly said. Hearing this, Jinshan's expression also gradually became solemn. At this moment, a soft knock sounded from outside the door, following which a respectful voice sounded. "Esteemed Dean, Changyang who has been brought here." "Come in," the dean said. The door opened, and a teacher walked in with Changyang who was wearing a brand new uniform, but there were still clear scars on his face. Changbo. As soon as he entered, Changyang who noticed Changbo standing beside the dean. He couldn't help but call out in surprise. The teacher didn't enter the dean's office. After sending Changyang who in, he respectfully bowed to the dean before gently closing the door. Changbo's gaze fell on the scars on Changyang who's face. A trace of anger flashed in his pair of ordinary old eyes, but his expression didn't change. He said in a gentle voice, "Eldest young master, you've suffered." Changyang, who didn't mind at all, and shook his head, saying, "It's just a small injury. It's not a big deal. However, Changbo, why did you come to the academy?" Changyang, whose tone carried a trace of doubt. Changbo's expression didn't change. He said in a gentle tone, "Eldest young master, 4th young master, have you packed your things?" Jianshan nodded silently and didn't say anything. "I've packed my things." "Changbo, are you here to take us away?" Changyang who asked with a reluctant expression. Changbo nodded. "That's right. I'm here to take you away. It's no longer suitable for you to continue staying in Kargath Academy." Hearing this, Changyang whose expression darkened. He had already stayed in Kargath Academy for quite some time. He already had a special feeling for the academy. Changyang Shoten, you two can leave first. I have some matters to discuss with Changbo, the dean suddenly said. Jianshan and Changyang, who didn't have any objections. They turned around and walked out of the dean's office. Jianshan and Changyang, who didn't have to wait for long. Changbo soon came out of the dean's office. But now, the way Changbo looked at Jianshan had changed. His eyes were filled with gratification and happiness. Jianshan and Changyang Shoten followed Changbo down the tower. They sat on Changbo's flying magic beast and left Kargath Academy. They flew straight in the direction of Lore City. Sitting on the back of the flying eagle, Jianshan and Changyang, who didn't speak. On the way home, both of them seemed to have a lot on their minds. In Jianshan's mind, the loving face of his mother, Bai Yun Tian, couldn't help but appear. Although Jianshan's state of mind was no longer that of a child, he had never experienced this hard-won motherly love in his previous life. Jianshan's resistance was obviously very low. In Jianshan's mind, he couldn't help but recall his life in Changyang Prefecture, his mother's 100% care and love for him. This made Jianshan's cold heart, which had never experienced motherly love and familial love, feel as if it was placed in a warm ocean. He enjoyed and cherished it very much. Time passed quietly. The Class 4 flying eagle quickly soared through the sky. Its extreme speed brought about gusts of whistling wind that constantly roared and roared in Jinshin's ears. Jinshin's long black hair that reached his waist danced wildly in the whistling wind. Coupled with his handsome and extremely dashing appearance, he looked even more dashing. The flying magic beast flew over various cities and villages in the pitch-black sky. After a few hours of continuous flight and a journey of several thousand kilometers, it finally successfully arrived at Lore City. Under the control of Changbo, the flying eagle slowly descended in the backyard of Changyang Prefecture. The miscellaneous people in the backyard had already been evacuated. Those who remained were the loyal guards of Changyang Prefecture. With a sudden gust of wind, the flying eagle slowly descended in the backyard of Changyang Prefecture. As soon as the flying eagle landed, Jinshin, Changyang Hu, and Changbo jumped off from its back. Over a dozen people had already gathered before the flying eagle. The leader was a middle-aged man who seemed to be in his 40s. He wore black and white robes. He was the master of Changyang Prefecture, as well as Jinshin's father, Changyang Ba. Beside Changyang Ba stood 4 extremely beautiful women. They were Jinshin's mother and 3 other aunts. Between the 4 women stood a girl who seemed to be in her teens. She was Jinshin's second sister, Changyang Mingyue, whom he had not seen for several months. Beside Changyang Mingyue was a boy who seemed to be around the same age as Jinshin. They were Jinshin's 3 Changyang Kus. However, Changyang Ke currently looked at Jinshin with a sliver of schadenfreude. Behind them stood a few middle-aged men and a few old men. They were all people of great authority in Changyang Prefecture. However, they were all extremely stern right now. Their gazes towards Jinshin were filled with mixed feelings. There was relief, anticipation, sighing, and helplessness. Changbo walked up to Changyang Ba and smiled faintly. Patriarch, fortunately, I have not failed you. I have safely brought back the 1st young master and the 4th young master. Changbo's expression was very calm. Changyang Ba clasped his hands at Changbo and said, Changbo, thank you for your hard work. You're too polite, Patriarch. This is only part of my job, Changbo said indifferently. Chapter 65. Jinshin and Changyang who returned to their mothers. Accompanied by 2 other aunts, they walked to the conference hall of Changyang Prefecture. Ahu, you've suffered at the academy. Look at the scar on your face. On the way, Jinshin's eldest aunt, Linglong, looked at the scar on Changyang Hu's face with a distressed expression. Her eyes gradually became moist and tears kept rolling in them. Changyang Hu didn't care at all. He smiled and said, Mother, it's just a small injury. It's not a big deal. Fortunately, my 4th brother saved me. Otherwise, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to get out of bed and walk now. Hearing this, Linglong turned to look at Jinshin with a gentle smile on her face. She said, Xiangtian, thank you so much for saving Ahu this time. Jinshin smiled and said, Eldest aunt, what are you talking about? My eldest brother is in trouble. It's my duty to help him. Moreover, this matter was caused by me. My eldest brother was just implicated. As long as you don't blame me, I'm very happy. Linglong smiled and said, Xiangtian, you're becoming more and more sensible. You're much better than us, and Ahu. You're flattering me, eldest aunt. Jinshin chuckled. He could clearly feel that Linglong's attitude towards him was much better now. At the very least, she was no longer as indifferent as she had been in the past. Mother, you're right. My 4th brother is very powerful. When he was not a saint, he could hunt 2nd-level demonic beasts alone. When he reached the saint realm, even Cheng Mingxiang, who was known as a cultivation genius in our Kargath Academy and had reached the senior saint realm, was no match for him. He was knocked down to the ground in a few moves. At that time, there were more than a dozen students who were above the saint realm besieging him. In the end, they were all easily injured by him. Speaking of this, Changyang Hu looked particularly excited. He said excitedly, Mother, you didn't see the scene at that time. It was spectacular. My 4th brother beat those people up in the blink of an eye. They were all primary and intermediate saints. They couldn't fight back at all. Hearing this, Jinshin's mother, Bai Yuntian, smiled happily and looked at Jinshin with affection. Oomph. At this moment, a cold snort sounded from his side. Jinshin's third aunt, by Yu Shuang, coldly said, "You're powerful, but you're powerful enough to offend the Huayan sect. You've brought great trouble to our Chanyang prefecture." Jinshin frowned. His third aunt, by Yu Shuang, had always had a prejudice against him since he was very young. Jinshin's mother, by Yuntian, was also very dissatisfied with Bai Yushuang's words. However, because it was her son who had caused trouble, she also felt that she was in the wrong. Moreover, his relationship with Bai Yushuang was not good, so she couldn't say anything. Otherwise, it would only escalate this small conflict. Jinshin's second aunt, Yu Fengyin, tried to mediate. "Forget it, third sister. What's done is done. It's useless to talk about it now. What we should do now is to properly think about how to deal with this matter." "Forget it, third sister. After all, Jinshin caused this trouble in order to save Ahu. This matter can't be completely blamed on him." Linglong also spoke up for Jinshin. Seeing that there were two people speaking up for Jinshin, Bai Yushuang lightly snorted and immediately shut her mouth. Bai Yuntian lightly sighed. Her gaze was both affectionate and worried as she looked at Jinshin. She said, "Xiang, we all know of your achievements in the Kargath Academy. Mother is proud of you. But how could you be so impulsive? You actually chopped off the Huayan sect's current sect master's son's arm. Do you know that not only have you caused great trouble for yourself, but you've also implicated the entire Chanyang prefecture?" Jinshin revealed a trace of guilt. He said, "I'm sorry, Mother. I brought so much trouble to the family. Xiangtian, this matter has already happened. Don't blame yourself. Right now, let's hurry to the conference hall and discuss how to deal with this matter." Second aunt, Yu Fengyin, spoke up. Afterwards, the group gradually quickened their pace and headed to the conference hall. At this moment, in a dazzling palace, the king of the kingdom of Jessen was reading the letter in his hand. His brows were tightly knitted together. After a long while, the king slowly sighed. He said, "This Chanyang Shoten is far too impulsive. He actually made such a huge mistake and chopped off the right arm of the Huayan sect's sect master's son. This matter has become huge. The Huayan sect is not something that the current Chanyang prefecture can contend against." The king slowly placed the letter on the table and shouted, "Men, tell the commander of the ironclad army, Bai Dao, to immediately come here." "Yes, your majesty." As soon as the king finished speaking, a eunuch immediately ran out. Very soon, a middle-aged man in black armor who seemed to be in his 40s walked in from outside. The middle-aged man's appearance was nothing special. He had a resolute expression and a pair of bright eyes. However, the most eye-catching thing about him was the extremely sinister scar on his forehead. The scar ran across his entire forehead, causing people to shudder in fear. The middle-aged man only stopped when he was 10 steps away from the king. He clasped his hands and said, "Your Majesty, may I ask why you've summoned me?" The king slowly stood up and took the letter from the desk to the middle-aged man, saying, "Take a look." Hearing this, the middle-aged man in black armor took the letter from his Majesty's hand, opened it, and began to read. But after he finished reading, his face became very dignified. "Sigh, I never thought that he would actually cause such a huge mess." The black-armored man deeply sighed as a sliver of worry appeared on his face. Young people are always so arrogant. They're just too impulsive. The king sighed. "Bai Dao, ever since you joined the ironclad army 20 years ago, you've never returned. Use this opportunity today to go back and take a look." "Yes, your majesty." A complicated expression flashed through the young man's eyes. The king suddenly became stern. "Bai Dao, you have to convince the people in Chanyang Prefecture to send Chanyang Shoten away as soon as possible. Otherwise, once the people from the Huayan sect find us, we'll be in deep trouble. Only by sending Chanyang Shoten away and mediating between us can we temporarily stabilize the conflict between Chanyang Prefecture and the Huayan sect. Right now, the surrounding countries have become restless. It looks like they haven't given up on the idea of invading our kingdom of Jessen. At such a critical moment, we can't allow any accidents to happen in our kingdom of Jessen, where the consequences will be unthinkable. Chanyang Shoten's talent is supreme, and his potential is limitless. His future is limitless. He might be the only hope of our kingdom of Jessen in the past several hundred years, so we have to protect Changyang Shoten. Although we can't guarantee that his future growth will be smooth, we can't let anything happen to him in our kingdom of Jessen." The king's voice was extremely stern. A sliver of pride and joy appeared on the young man's face when he heard that. He forcefully suppressed his excitement and said, "Your Majesty, Bai Dao understands. I know what to do." The king slowly nodded. "Bai Dao, there's no time to lose. Immediately set off for Chanyang Prefecture. With your strength, I believe you'll be able to reach Chanyang Prefecture before daybreak." "Yes, Your Majesty." In the discussion hall of Chanyang Prefecture, Chanyang Ba sat boldly on the main seat. Below him sat Jianshun, his aunts, and a few core members of Chanyang Prefecture. Below Chanyang Ba sat caretaker Chang Bo. Chanyang Ba's face was filled with worry as he looked at Jianshun with a complicated gaze. He then said, "I'm sure everyone knows about what happened to Xiang in the academy. The Huayan sect's current sect master's arm was cut off by Xiang. The Huayan sect will definitely not let this matter rest. Do you have any good methods to deal with this?" Everyone fell silent when they heard that. The Huayan sect was the greatest power in the kingdom of Jessen aside from the imperial family. Its strength was something that even the imperial family feared. It was not something that the current Chanyang Prefecture could handle. Cheng Mingxiang was the only son of the current sect master and had been extremely talented since he was young. Now that his right arm had been cut off by Jianshun, his future would be greatly affected. Without any exaggeration, Jianshun had completely destroyed Cheng Mingxiang. Everyone present knew that the Huayan sect definitely wouldn't let this matter rest. After a moment of silence, an old man in his 60s finally said, "Right now, the best solution is to ask a Radiant Saint Master to regenerate Cheng Mingxiang's severed arm. However, only Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters have the ability to regenerate severed limbs. They're not people that we can ask. Furthermore, Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters are extremely rare on the Tianyuan continent. They do not have a fixed residence, and finding one is as difficult as ascending to the heavens. So, the chances of Cheng Mingxiang's severed arm being regenerated are basically zero." "Sai, that's right. In my opinion, this is the only way to quell the Huayan sect's anger. There's no other way. Even if the imperial family is willing to support us, I don't think the Huayan sect will let this matter rest. However, one thing is for sure. The fourth young master will be hard to protect," a middle-aged man analyzed. The middle-aged men and old men present were all people of great authority in Chanyang Prefecture. They had long heard of Jianshun's performance in the academy, and they had already placed the hopes of Chanyang Prefecture on Jianshun. As a result, although Jianshun had caused great trouble for Chanyang Prefecture, no one blamed him. Everyone was thinking of ways to protect him. In addition, Jianshun was now engaged to Princess Glan of the Kingdom of Jessen. If this marriage went through, Chanyang Prefecture's status in the Kingdom of Jessen would rise. If only the ancestor was here, an old man helplessly sighed. Hearing that, Chang Bo's eyes brightened. He sighed, "That's right. If Master was still here, we wouldn't have to gather here to discuss this matter. Unfortunately, Master has already been gone for several decades without any news. I wonder if he has failed." Hearing that, everyone in the hall fell silent. Jianshun's heart trembled. Although he had never heard of the ancestor or Chang Bo's master, he was able to infer some things from these words. He already knew that the ancestor everyone was talking about and the master Chang Bo was talking about should be the same person. Not only was this person incomparably powerful, not fearing the Huayan sect that had two great experts, but this person was also his ancestor. This question didn't hover in Jianshun's mind for long. Jianshun quickly threw it aside. Looking at the silent people in the hall, Jianshun hesitated for a moment before suddenly saying, "Father, how about we have Chang Bo send me out on a flying magical beast? As long as I'm not in Chanyang Prefecture, I believe that even if the Huayan sect really comes, they won't do anything excessive." "No, no." Just as Jianshun's words fell, Bai Yuntian and Chanyang Ba's voices rang out at the same time. Chapter 66. "That's right. Xiang, your mother is right. The outside world isn't as peaceful as the academy. It's filled with slaughter. With your current strength, you don't have the ability to survive. Don't bring this up again. I definitely won't agree to it. Changyangba said sincerely. Although his voice was calm, he firmly rejected Jinshan's idea. Jinshan had long since known that it would be very difficult for his family to agree to his idea. However, he didn't give up and continued, "Father, mother, don't worry. Although your child isn't very strong, I have the ability to protect myself. Moreover, I've read many books in the academy and am already familiar with the ways of the Tianyuan continent. Once your child becomes powerful in the Changyang prefecture, I'll be able to reduce quite a bit of trouble for the Changyang prefecture." Fourth young master, things aren't as simple as you think. Once the Huayan sect learns that you aren't in the Changyang prefecture, they'll probably send a large number of people to search for you. With the Huayan sect's influence in the kingdom of Jesson, it won't be difficult for them to find you. The one who spoke was a white-haired old man. In the hearts of these old men, Jinshan had already become the future hope of the Changyang prefecture. None of them wanted him to die halfway. A 15-year-old saint with strength no weaker than a high-tier saint or even a great saint. Such a heaven-defying genius would definitely be earth-shaking even in the entire Tianyuan continent. Perhaps in the eyes of these old men, Jinshan was no longer a person, but a living treasure. A treasure that radiated with endless light and could bring them endless wealth. As a result, the only thing on the minds of these people in the upper echelon of the Changyang prefecture was how to protect Jinshan and prevent him from being harmed in the slightest so that it wouldn't affect his future. Jinshan revealed a confident smile and said, "There's no need for everyone to worry about that. I've learned a lot about surviving on the continent from the Academy's library. I believe that I'll be able to escape the Huayun sect's pursuit." "No, Xianger, this is too risky. It's not worth it." Changyangba directly rejected Jinshan's suggestion. He continued, "Xianger, don't worry. Although the Huayan sect is powerful, our Changyang prefecture isn't a pushover. Furthermore, although your grandfather has disappeared for many years, the prestige he left behind in this place still exists. The Huayan sect definitely won't dare to do anything to our Changyang prefecture. If you stay here, we'll definitely do our best to protect you." Jinshan sighed in his heart. From Changyangba's firm tone, he could tell that his father would never agree with his idea. "That's right. But Xianger, this idea of yours is too risky. Even if you can escape the Huayun sect pursuit, the Tianyuan continent's environment is not as simple as what you've read. It's best if you obediently stay in Changyang prefecture. At the very least, your father and the other uncles will do their best to protect you." Bai Yuntian gently advised Jinshan. "Cough." Changyangba lightly coughed and said, "All right, let's discuss how to deal with the Huayan sect. I estimate that they've already received the news and will quickly rush over to Lore City. Time is of the essence." Changyangba's face returned to its previous seriousness. Everyone in the hall fell silent once more, tightly knitting their brows as they pondered. Why don't we ask the royal family for help? After all, the fourth young master is married to the kingdom of Jesson's princess Glan. In the future, the fourth young master will be the king's son-in-law. Now that his son-in-law is in trouble, I believe that the king will not sit by and do nothing. Someone said. Hearing this, Changbo pondered for a moment before saying, "If the royal family is willing to stand by our side and help us with all their strength, we can temporarily suppress this matter. However, this will definitely cause the Huayan sect to be dissatisfied with the royal family. Furthermore, this is an extremely important time. In recent years, the surrounding countries have been secretly mobilizing their troops, seemingly ready to make trouble. I estimate that they are planning to invade our kingdom of Jesson's rich territory. At such a crucial time, I believe that the king will not allow his relationship with the Huayan sect to deteriorate. After all, this is a matter of life and death for the kingdom of Jesson. Without the two heaven saint masters from the Huayan sect, the kingdom of Jesson will not be able to contend against the other countries in terms of peak experts. Although the fourth young master has great potential and is a source of hope for the kingdom of Jesson, no one can say for sure what the fourth young master's future will be like. Furthermore, the fourth young master is still young and needs a very long time to mature. At such a crucial time, the kingdom of Jessin simply does not have that much time to wait. Perhaps by that time, the kingdom of Jessin would have already been destroyed. In the eyes of the king, although geniuses are important, they are far less important than a kingdom. If the kingdom is destroyed, then even if there is an expert supporting him, what can he do? After all, establishing a kingdom is just far too difficult. Thus, I do not believe that the royal family will help us with all their strength. Afterwards, the people in the hall began to think of all sorts of methods, but after an entire night, they were unable to come up with a single one. Very quickly, the night passed under the tense atmosphere of the dozen or so people in the hall. At this moment, the sky was already starting to turn gray. It was already close to dawn. After an entire night of discussion, everyone looked a little tired. At this moment, a guard from Changyang Prefecture ran in from outside and said, "Patriarch, a person who calls himself Bai Dao has arrived. He says he wants to see you." "Bai Dao?" Changyang Ba murmured with that. A sliver of thought appeared in his eyes before his eyes lit up. He immediately stood up from his chair and hurriedly said, "Invite him in." "Yes, sir." The guard accepted the order and quickly retreated. When Bai Yintian heard Bai Dao's name, she clearly trembled slightly. A sliver of joy appeared in her eyes, but her expression soon became mixed. A sliver of doubt appeared in Jian Chen's eyes when he noticed the change in expression on his mother's face. He had never heard of this person called Bai Dao before, but judging from his mother's reaction, Bai Dao was probably acquainted with her. Jian Chen gently nudged Bai Yintian and asked softly, "Mother, who's this person called Bai Dao?" Bai Yintian turned her head slightly and looked at Jian Chen with a doting gaze. She said, "Xianger, I'll tell you about this later." "Okay." Jian Chen nodded and said nothing more. Very soon, a middle-aged man in black robes strode in from outside. His face was resolute, and his sharp eyes flickered with light from time to time. On his forehead was a scar that stretched across his entire forehead, making him seem extremely vicious. Changyang Ba left his seat and made his way to the center of the discussion hall. He clasped his hands and smiled. "Brother Bai Dao, I never thought that I wouldn't see you in 20 years. How have you been?" The middle-aged man called Bai Dao clasped his hands slightly and replied, "I've been all right." Bai Dao paused for a while when he reached there. His gaze paused on Jianxin and his mother for a while before he turned around and said, "Let's get straight to business. I've come under the king's orders this time, and I'm also here to pass on his orders." Changyang Ba immediately became stern when he heard that. He asked, "Brother Bai Dao, does it have something to do with Xianger?" Bai Dao nodded, "Correct. The king wants you to immediately send Changyang Shoten away from Lore City. That's the only way to avoid a conflict between Changyang Prefecture and the Huayin sect for now." Changyang Ba frowned when he heard that. He clearly did not want to do this. Bai Dao continued, "The matter this time has gotten a little out of hand. Cheng Mingxiang is the only son of the Huayin sect's sect master, and he's a talented citizen. He's the future pillar of the Huayin sect." Changyang Shoten chopped off Cheng Mingxiang's right arm, and Wu Ning destroyed Cheng Mingxiang. As a result, the Huayin sect will not let this matter go so easily. The Huayin sect has 2 heaven saint masters. It's not something the current Changyang Prefecture can contend against. Although the imperial family also has 2 heaven saint masters, these are special times. The neighboring kingdoms have begun to stir again. If I've guessed correctly, the kingdom of Jessin will be baptized by the flames of war again very soon. At this time, the king definitely won't offend the Huayin sect. As a result, we can only send Changyang Shoten away and have the imperial family mediate between us. Only then can we temporarily calm this matter and preserve the strength of the kingdom of Jessin. Is there really no other way? This time, it was Jianxin's second aunt, Yu Fengyan, who spoke. "No." Bai Dao shook his head, his voice filled with certainty. Bai Yuntian's face had already paled. Her voice trembled as she said, "But the people outside are vicious. Xiang is still weak right now, so he'll definitely suffer a lot." Bai Dao deeply glanced at Jianxin, who sat beside Bai Yuntian, and said, "Only through suffering can one rise above others. If one doesn't experience the wind and rain, How can one grow into someone who could stand on their own? Spoiling him like this will not benefit him at all. Instead, it'll harm him. Hearing that, the upper echelons of Chanyang Prefecture all nodded. Bai Dao's words made sense. However, Chanyang Ba was still hesitant. Jinshin looked around. He knew that his chance had come, so he immediately struck while the iron was hot. He said, "Father, just let me leave. I'm confident that I can deal with anything that happens in the future. At the same time, I really want to go out and explore." "Patriarch, since the fourth young master wants to go out and explore, why don't we let him leave Lore City?" Bai Dao is right. Not only is this the only way to temporarily avoid conflict between our Chanyang Prefecture and the Huayan sect, but it'll also be a very good training for the fourth young master. Without experiencing the wind and rain, no matter how talented the fourth young master is, his accomplishments will be limited in the end, Changbo said at this moment. Chanyang Ba helplessly sighed when he heard that. He said, "Whatever. Since Changbo agrees with this suggestion, let's let Xianger leave Lore City and train outside. I'll send a few loyal guards with Xianger to protect his safety." Jinshin could not help but frown when he heard that his father would send guards to protect him. He said, "Father, there's no need to send guards. I want to go out and explore by myself. Xianger, it's far too dangerous for you to go out alone. Calling a few guards can at least guarantee that you won't be bullied." Bai Yuntian said with concern as she held Jinshin's hand tightly. Now that things had developed to this point, there was nothing she could do. She could only accept this reality. Chapter 67. Although Chanyang Ba strongly objected to Jinshin not having any guards, Jinshin was extremely firm on this matter. In the end, Chanyang Ba could only agree to Jinshin's request. Once everything was discussed, Bai Dao spoke once more. "According to the news I've received from the Imperial Palace, the Huayan sect has already received the news and is hurrying over to Lore City. They'll probably arrive by noon at the latest, so you should send Chanyang Shoten away as soon as possible. Otherwise, it'll be too late." Everyone in the hall could not help but become stern when they heard that. Changbo stood up from his chair and said, "Then let your fourth young master pack up. I'll take him away on a hawk later." Afterward, everyone left the discussion hall. "Xianger, let's go. Let's go to Mother's room. Mother has some things to tell you." As soon as they left the discussion hall, Bai Yuntian pulled Jinshin to her room. After entering her room, Bai Yuntian pulled Jinshin to a chair and sat down. Her face was currently covered in tears because she knew extremely well that they would not be able to see each other for a very long time after Jinshin left. At the same time, who knew how many hardships Jinshin would have to endure on the Tianyuan continent, where people were sinister and the situation was complicated. Perhaps the worst-case scenario would be the last time they would see each other. "Xianger, you're not young anymore, and you're about to leave soon. There are some things that Mother should tell you." Bai Yuntian's face was covered in crystalline tears as she said, "Xianger, don't you find it very strange why you don't have a grandfather or a grandmother?" Jinshin nodded and said nothing. Bai Yuntian continued, "Xianger, Mother isn't actually from the kingdom of Jessen. Instead, I'm from the Karl Empire, one of the 3 great empires on the continent. Our Bai family is a great clan that has existed for over 1,000 years in the Karl Empire. Our clan is large, and our influence is far greater than the current Huayan sect. In Hellfire City of the Karl Empire, our Bai family has been the most powerful clan in Hellfire City for several hundred years. This is because your great-grandfather is a saint ruler, and other than him, there are 4 other great-grandfathers who are Heaven Saint Masters. They are all elders of the Bai family." At this point, Bai Yuntian sighed. "Unfortunately, good times don't last long. 30 years ago, when I was still young, your great-grandfather went out without any news, and he never came back. No one knew what happened. 20 years after your great-grandfather disappeared, 2 of the 4 elders of our Bai family went out to search for your great-grandfather. However, just 2 days after they left, a shocking piece of news came to our Bai family. The 2 elders who went out to search for your great-grandfather were actually killed in the wilderness." Bai Yuntian's face was filled with sorrow when she said this. This news is like a bolt out of the blue to our Bai family. The 2 elders were both Heaven Saint Masters. Even on the Tianyuan continent, they could be regarded as peak experts, but I never thought that the two of them would actually be killed. They did not even have the chance to escape. From this, our Bai family has realized that a powerful enemy has begun to plot against our Bai family. Perhaps your great-grandfather has already met with misfortune. It's a pity that the enemy didn't give us any time to catch our breath. On the night we learned that the two elders have been killed, a large group of mysterious people charged into our Bai family and began a massacre. They were extremely powerful, and the two remaining elders of the Bai family were unable to suppress them completely. In the end, they were killed by them. Seeing that even the two most powerful elders of the Bai family had died, there was no one left in the Bai family who could stop the enemy. At that time, your grandparents and a few loyal guards of the Bai family all died in battle to protect me and a group of people from the Bai family. In the end, only your uncle and I managed to escape. We hid in a small household in Hellfire City, which was how we managed to avoid being captured. Your uncle and I have been hiding for a few days. After everything calmed down, the two of us changed our appearances and concealed our identities. We escorted a caravan out of Hellfire City as mercenaries and finally arrived in the kingdom of Jessen. Tears continuously flowed from Bai Yuntian's eyes, and her expression was filled with sorrow and pain. Xiang the Bai family that was once incomparably glorious with thousands of people, is now only the two of us and your uncle. You must remember that not only does the blood of Changyang Prefecture flow in your veins, half of it is also the blood of the Bai family. The continuation of our Bai family depends on you, so you must protect yourself well outside. Understand? Jianshin nodded silently, but his heart was already in turmoil, unable to calm down for a long time. The impact of his mother's words on Jianshin was just too great. After a while, Jianshin finally calmed down and asked, "Mother, don't we know the identity of those mysterious people? Which faction they belong to?" Bai Yuntian shook her head. "We don't know. Your uncle and I were still young back then, so we didn't know much, so we didn't know who they were at all. The two elders of our Bai family probably knew, but they're already dead." As she spoke, Bai Yuntian took out a red brocade pouch from her bosom. She stared at it blankly, as if she was immersed in her memories. She murmured, "Xiang before your grandfather passed away, he gave this brocade pouch to your mother. He said that this is our Bai family's heirloom, passed down for generation to generation. It has been passed down for thousands of years. He told me to take good care of it. Those mysterious people came to destroy our Bai family because of this brocade pouch." Jinshin's gaze fell on the red pouch and asked, "Mother, what's inside?" "There's only a piece of skin the size of a palm inside. As for what it's used for, I don't know." As she spoke, Bai Yuntian stuffed the red pouch into Jinshin's hands and said, "Xiang although this pouch only contains a piece of skin, since it's our family heirloom, it's definitely not that simple. Now that you're the only descendant of our Bai family, I should give this pouch to you. I hope you can take good care of it, but it's best if you don't take it out outside. Although it's very difficult to meet someone who knows what's inside, it's better to be safe than sorry." Jinshan tightly held the red pouch in his hands and silently nodded. Dong dong dong. At this moment, a series of knocks suddenly came from the door. Hearing the knocks, Bai Yuntian wiped the tears from her face and said, "Who is it?" There was no sound from outside. After quite a while, a voice rang out, "Sister, it's me." Jinshan became stunned when he heard the familiar voice, because he just happened to hear this voice before. It belonged to the middle-aged man, called by Dao, who had come from the imperial palace. A complicated expression flashed through Bai Yuntian's face when she heard the voice. She said, "Come in, come in." The door opened, and a middle-aged man in black robes slowly walked in. It was Bai Dao. Bai Yuntian stood up and looked at Bai Dao. She bitterly said, "Brother, it's been 20 years. You've finally come to visit your sister. I thought you'd forgotten about me long ago." Jinshin's eyes narrowed slightly. From how his mother had addressed the middle-aged man, he could tell that he was his uncle. Sigh. Bai Dao let out a long sigh. "Sister, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I haven't come to see you in the past 20 years. Actually, I haven't forgotten about you. It's just that the burden on my shoulders is just too heavy. I will definitely take revenge for the Bai family." I will only live for revenge in my life. Bai Yuntian sighed, before turning to Jinshin. She gently said, Xiang'er, he's your uncle, Bai Dao. Uncle, Jinshin called out. This was the first time he had heard of this uncle of his, and it was also the first time he had seen him. Bai Dao studied Jinshin and could not help but faintly smile. He said, Xiangtian, I've heard about your achievements in Kargath Academy from the Imperial Palace. Very good. You really are a descendant of our Bai family. I hope you work hard and don't disappoint us all. With that, Bai Dao suddenly became stern. He said to Bai Yuntian, Sister, I know you don't want Xiangtian to leave, but there's nothing we can do about it. Chanyang Prefecture is not the Huayan sect's opponent right now. If we leave Xiangtian in Chanyang Prefecture, not only will it be difficult to protect him, it won't bring any benefits to Chanyang Prefecture either. Perhaps Chanyang Prefecture will end up like my Bai family. Let's get Xiangtian to leave as soon as possible. If we're too late, he won't be able to leave even if he wants to. Bai Yuntian gently nodded. She understood that the imperial family was unwilling to stand on their side. Afterward, Bai Yuntian prepared some necessities and some clothes for Jinshin with tears streaming down her face before leaving the room with Jinshin. Jinshin's aunts, Chanyang Ba and Changbo were already there when they arrived in the backyard of Chanyang Prefecture. The large eagle was sitting there obediently. Chanyang, who grabbed Jinshin's arm and solemnly looked at him. He said in concern, Brother, you have to take care of yourself outside, okay? Jinshin nodded and smiled. Don't worry, brother. I'll definitely take care of myself. But don't slack off after I leave. You have to study more battle techniques. Chanyang, who firmly nodded and firmly said, I will. Brother, I've dragged you down this time because of my lack of strength. I'll definitely work hard on cultivation in the future. At this moment, Jinshin's sister, Chanyang Mingyue, arrived before Jinshin and passed a pouch to Jinshin. She said, Brother, this is a protective talisman I've made for you. I hope you'll be safe outside. You have to keep it with you. Chanyang Mingyue was now 18 and had become a slender young lady. She was as beautiful as a flower, capable of causing the downfall of nations. Jinshin accepted the protective talisman from Chanyang Mingyue. Although he knew that the protective talisman would not bring him any substantial benefits, it was still a token of his sister's goodwill. Thank you, sister. I'll definitely take good care of this protective talisman. Jinshin smiled. At this moment, Chanyang Ba took out a ring from his bosom and said, Xiang'er, I've already prepared this space ring for you. I originally planned on giving it to you after you graduated from the academy, but it looks like I don't need to wait that long. I'll give it to you right now. I've already prepared some necessary items for you inside. Thank you, father. Jinshan silently accepted the space ring with mixed feelings. Xiang'er, space rings are extremely valuable items on the Tianyuan continent. You can't reveal this space ring before you're strong enough, just in case you attract unnecessary trouble, Chanyang Ba said solemnly. Chapter 68. After bidding farewell to everyone, Jinshin was led by Changbo onto the hawk and flew away from Lore City. Jinshin lowered his head as he sat on the back of the hawk. He stared blankly at the large city several thousand meters below. His emotions were extremely complicated. This was the second time he had left Chanyang Prefecture and Lore City in the 15 years since he had arrived in this world. The first time he had left was to study in Kargath Academy, but this time was completely different. Jinshin understood that he would not be able to see his family again for a very long time after he left this time. Moreover, he would have to travel alone on the extremely dangerous Tianyuan continent that was filled with the aura of slaughter. He would have to rely on himself for everything. Jinshin did not even know if he would have the chance to see his family again in the future. After all, he had already understood the situation of the Tianyuan continent from the books. This was a world where the strong were respected. Everything on the Tianyuan continent was based on strength. It was much more dangerous than the Jianghu of his previous life. With his current strength, no one knew what would happen in the future if he were to travel on this extremely dangerous continent. Changbo glanced at Jinshin, who was deep in thought as he sat on the hawk. He said, Fourth young master, everything will depend on you from now on. You must be careful when you travel alone on the continent. I know what to do, Changbo, Jianshun replied softly without even turning his head. Changbo stared deeply at Jianshun and sighed inside. He did not say anything else. The hawk flew straight towards the sun that had just appeared at the horizon. The fierce wind whistled in their ears, causing Jianshun and Changbo's hair and clothes to flutter. The flying eagle flew past several cities and villages of various sizes. Just as the sun was about to set, the flying eagle finally flew over a small city. Looking at the small city below, Jianshun suddenly said, "Changbo, send me off here." Changbo lowered his head and looked at the small city below. He nodded, "All right." Afterward, Changbo controlled the hawk to stop 10 kilometers away from the city. Jianshun jumped off the hawk and turned to Changbo, saying, "Changbo, you should hurry back. The Huayan sect has probably already arrived in our Chanyang prefecture." Changbo nodded from the hawk and said, "Fourth young master, take care of yourself." Jianshun waved his hand at Changbo, then walked toward the city 10 kilometers away without looking back. Changbo sat on the hawk, staring at Jianshun's back. Only when Jianshun disappeared from his line of sight did he sigh and mutter to himself, "Fourth young master, I hope that when we meet again, you can give me a pleasant surprise." The eagle's wings flapped violently. With a burst of sand and pebbles, smoke and dust filled the air. It had already brought Uncle Chang up into the sky and returned in the direction they came from. Right now, the sun was about to set and the sky was dusk. When Jianshun arrived at the road leading to the small city, there were still many people walking towards the city. However, they were mostly mercenaries riding various magic beasts and caravans. Jianshun's appearance naturally attracted the attention of some people. Many mercenaries looked at him with vigilance, but when they saw Jianshun's young face and saw his age, the vigilance in their eyes immediately disappeared. Jianshun sized up these mercenaries riding various magic beasts. He saw that these mercenaries looked to be in their 20s to 50s. Some are wearing armor, some are wearing beast skins, and some are wearing clothes. When he got closer, Jianshun could clearly feel that these mercenaries had a bloody aura. With his rich experience, he naturally knew that these mercenaries had been baptized by slaughter. 10 kilometers was not a long distance, so Jianshun arrived very quickly. Jianshun raised his head and looked at the 20-meter high city wall in front of him. The city wall had clearly been there for many years, and it was not maintained for many years. The merciless passage of time had left clear marks on the tall city wall. Above the city gate, 3 words were written in flamboyant calligraphy: White Cloud City. "Hey, stop, what are you doing?" Just as Jianshun passed by the city gate, he was stopped by a guard. Jianshun chuckled. He took out a few gold coins from his spatial belt and stuffed them into the guard's hand. He said, "Brother, I'm a mercenary. I've come to White Cloud City with a mission." The guard glanced at the gold coins in his hand from the corner of his eye. He immediately put on a smile and said, "Oh, since you have a mission, I won't delay your precious matters. Go on in." After entering White Cloud City, Jianshun walked another 2 to 3 kilometers and arrived at a bustling street. Although the sun had already set, the street was still bustling. There was an endless stream of people coming and going on the streets. On both sides of the street, there were shops that sold all kinds of goods. The ground of the street was completely pieced together by large pieces of stone. The surface was very smooth, so the inside was very flat. Even if a vehicle was running on it at a slow speed, it would not feel the slightest bit of bump. Jianshun rubbed his stomach. Then he looked at a restaurant on the street and walked in. He had not eaten for the entire day, so his stomach was hurting from hunger. "Sir, please come in." Jianshun found an empty table and sat down under the warm welcome of a waiter. "Sir, would you like to stay in the restaurant or have a meal?" The waiter was a young man who was about 20 years old. He had a professional smile on his face, which made him look very friendly. Jianshun glanced at the mercenaries who were chatting loudly in the restaurant and said calmly, "I'm going to stay in the restaurant and have a meal. What kind of food do you have here?" Then the waiter immediately introduced Jianshun to all kinds of things in the restaurant. However, the dishes that he introduced were all the most expensive in the restaurant. This was because the waiter could already tell that Jianshun was a rich young master from the luxurious clothes that he was wearing. Jianshun did not care about the price of these dishes and casually ordered a few dishes that he had not tried before. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Jianshun booked a medium-sized room in the restaurant and went straight into the room to rest. This restaurant was obviously not high-end. The furnishings in this medium-sized room were very simple. Compared to Chanyang Prefecture, it was simply world apart. Other than a wooden bed made of hardwood, there was only a table and a few chairs in the room. Other than that, there was nothing else. Even so, the room was very clean. Jianshun never had the habit of being picky. This kind of room was already quite satisfactory for him. After closing the door, Jianshun walked to the bed and sat down. Then he took out the space ring that his father gave him before he left and opened it to check the items inside. The space ring was indeed a high-grade item. The space inside was much larger than a belt. It was close to 100 square meters. In the center of the space ring, there was a small pile of items. There were not many items. Compared to the space of 100 square meters, this small pile of items could not even fill up a corner. Within the pile of items, there were several thousand purple coins that flickered with a purple light and over 10,000 gold coins that shone with a golden light. Other than these items, there was also a small pile of monster cores. There were only around 40 to 50 of them. Class 2 monster cores were the majority. There were only around 10 Class 3 monster cores and 1 Class 4 monster core. Looking at the items in the space ring, Jianshun felt warmth in his heart for a moment. Although there were not many items, they were all very practical and just happened to be what Jianshun needed. From this, it was enough to see how much Chanyang Ba cared about Jianshun. Jianshun carefully kept the space ring close to his chest. He did not forget what his father had told him before he left. Before he became strong enough, he could not expose the space ring to others. This was because space rings were not as common as space belts. Space rings were very precious in the Tianyuan continent. Although there were many people who possessed space rings, all of them were either powerful or the descendants of famous families. They had enough strength to protect their belongings. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, Jianshun took out a few monster cores from his space belt and held them in his hand. Then, he slowly closed his eyes and entered a state of cultivation. The energy within the monster cores was absorbed by Jianshun at an extremely terrifying speed. At this moment, if someone was present, they would definitely see the monster cores in Jianshun's hand emitting a faint glow. The energy leaking from the monster cores was so dense that it formed a blurry, visible energy ribbon that enveloped Jianshun's body. At the same time, the Class 1 monster cores in Jianshun's hand rapidly shrank in size. Ever since Jianshun broke through to the Saint Realm and 2 specks of light appeared in his dantian, his path of cultivation had become extremely difficult. Although the speed at which he absorbed the energy of the world had increased by more than 10 times, he only absorbed a pitiful 1% of it. Although the speed at which he absorbed the energy of the monster cores was much faster than before, the consumption of the monster cores was so great that it was not something that Jianshun could bear. It only took 2 hours for Jianshun to absorb the Class 1 monster cores in his hand. Then, Jianshun continued to take out several Class 1 monster cores from his space belt and continued to cultivate. Fortunately, he still had a few hundred Class 1 and Class 2 monster cores in his space belt. Although it was not much, it could at least sustain his cultivation for a few days. Moreover, there were more than 10 Class 3 monster cores and 2 Class 4 monster cores in the space belt that his father gave him. The next day, when the sun had risen high in the sky, Jianshun woke up from his cultivation state. That night, he had used another 40 to 50 monster cores just for cultivation alone. Sigh. Feeling the rapidly decreasing number of monster cores in his space belt, Jianshun let out a long sigh. His face was full of helplessness. The purple and green specks of light in his dantian had really brought him endless distress. After calming down, Jianshun walked out of the room and directly left the restaurant, strolling on the street outside. The morning air was particularly clear, and the fiery red sun in the sky had not yet released its scorching heat. The warm sunlight shining on one's body gave a very comfortable feeling. There were many mercenaries hurrying about on the street, and from time to time, There would be pairs of peddlers slowly flowing along the street. Chapter 69. In the Tianyuan continent, no matter which country or city it was, the mercenary union would always be built in the center of the city. Beside the mercenary union, there would always be a bank that was not much smaller than the mercenary union. Although the White Cloud City was only a second-tier city, it still occupied a very large area. Jianshun walked on the streets for an hour before finally arriving at the most bustling street in the center of the city. In front of him, there was a 20-meter-tall building that stood there silently, like a giant beast in the deep sea. It was the Mercenary Union. The Mercenary Union was very large, and the shape of the building looked more like a kind of magical beast. At the entrance, there was an endless stream of mercenaries in various outfits. Jianshun directly entered the Mercenary Union. Although this was his first time coming to such a place, he had already read about the procedures to become a mercenary in the Academy's library. There were many people in the Mercenary Union. The mercenaries who needed to go through the procedures were lined up like a long dragon. The dozen or so windows in front of the counter were filled with people. However, they were all here to hand over missions. The innermost window for registering as a mercenary was very cold. Jianshun came to the window for registering as a mercenary and said, "Hello, I would like to register as a mercenary." The person in charge of registering as a mercenary was an old man. He looked to be in his 50s or 60s. Even so, his face was rosy and his old eyes were bright. The old man looked at Jianshun indifferently and said calmly, "To register as a mercenary, you need to have the strength of a saint. Have you reached that level?" "I have already reached that standard," Jianshun said. The old man looked at Jianshun carefully and then took out a piece of paper. At the same time, he asked, "What's your name?" "Jianshun." Jianshun, who wanted to conceal his identity, naturally would not use the name Changyang Shoten. So, he directly reported the name he used in his previous life. "How old are you this year?" The old man continued to ask. Hearing that, Jianshun thought for a moment before replying, 20 years old. Jianshun could not reveal his true age because a 15-year-old saint was just too rare on the Tianyuan continent. Once this matter spread, it would probably cause him some unnecessary trouble. In the Kargath Academy, although many people knew that Jianshun was extremely talented, only the principal and vice principal knew his true age. A 20-year-old saint was considered quite common on the Tianyuan continent. Moreover, his body had developed far more than ordinary people since he was young, so no one would suspect him even if he said that he was 20 years old. Right now, he looked no different from a 20-year-old youth. "What level of strength have you reached?" the old man asked as he took notes on the paper. "Junior saint," Jianshun replied. The process of registering as a mercenary was very simple. After paying a silver coin, Jianshun officially became a mercenary and obtained his mercenary badge. However, with his current strength, he could only obtain the lowest mercenary badge. After obtaining the badge, Jianshun did not stay in the mercenary union for long and directly left. After asking around, he came to a store that sold medicine. Although there were Radiant Saint Masters who could heal all kinds of injuries on the Tianyuan continent, there were extremely few of them. As a result, Radiant Saint Masters possessed a lofty status on the Tianyuan continent. Very few mercenaries could afford to hire a Radiant Saint Master. Only large mercenary groups could afford to hire a Radiant Saint Master. It was basically impossible for small mercenary groups and individual mercenaries to obtain information on Radiant Saint Masters without paying an exorbitant price. There were countless mercenaries on the Tianyuan continent, and countless people died almost every day. Since Radiant Saint Masters were in short supply, there was naturally a need to use medicine to heal. Although the effects of medicine were worlds apart from the healing of Radiant Saint Masters, it was accepted by most mercenaries. This was because normal medicine was extremely cheap apart from high-quality medicines. Although this pharmacy wasn't small, it was still packed with people. Moreover, this pharmacy wasn't like the mercenary union. The soundproofing facilities in the pharmacy were too good. Under the loud voices of the mercenaries, the entire pharmacy seemed to be very noisy. There There were many people buying medicine in the store. There was already a long line of people. Jiansheng glanced around and then stood in a line with fewer people. "May I ask what you need?" Very soon, it was Jiansheng's turn. The clerk sitting at the counter greeted him warmly. "I need some herbs." "Do you sell herbs here?" Jiansheng asked. The shop assistant looked at Jiansheng strangely. This was the first time he had encountered someone who didn't come here to buy medicine, but herbs. Although he was very curious about Jiansheng's request, the shop assistant still replied, "Of course we're selling." "Sir, what kind of herbs do you need?" "As long as we have them, we can take them out." "I need Chelan grass, mop grass, vanilla grass, skeleton grass, sawtooth grass, antelope flower, root flower, lily tortoise fungus. Do you have these here?" Jiansheng listed more than a dozen herbs in a single breath. The clerk nodded without any hesitation and said, "Yes, these herbs are all very common. They're not very expensive. We have all of them. May I ask how many you need?" Jiansheng's face showed a trace of happiness. He directly took out a gold coin and placed it in front of the counter, saying, "Give me some of each." These herbs were all very common species. 1 gold coin was enough to buy a cart full of them. Seeing the gold coin on the table, the clerk's eyes lit up. He immediately said, "Okay, please wait for a moment. I will go get them for you now." After saying that, the clerk directly entered the store. After taking the herbs he needed, Jiansheng left the store. Then, without stopping, he walked out of the city. He arrived at a small forest 10 miles away from the city. He dug up some soft mud and collected some leaves. After putting them into a space belt, he returned to White Cloud City. After buying some ordinary clothes in White Cloud City, Jiansheng arrived at a secluded alley. He hid in a hidden corner and looked around. After confirming that there was no one around, Jiansheng immediately took out a small portion of the herbs he had bought from the store. He first crushed the herbs into powder before mixing them with a small amount of water. After that, he added some soft mud from the deep soil. Finally, he ground a few leaves into powder and squeezed them dry. The pitiful amount of juice dripped out. Once he was done, Jiansheng directly grabbed the mixture and carefully smeared it on his face. Very quickly, when Jiansheng raised his head again, his appearance had completely changed. At this moment, Jiansheng looked like a completely different person. Even if someone familiar with him saw his current appearance, they wouldn't be able to recognize him. This was because Jiansheng's appearance now looked like a completely different person. His originally handsome face had become ordinary. Even his eyebrows and eyelashes had been modified by him, making them even shorter than before. The only thing that hadn't changed about him was his pair of magnetic eyes and his skinny figure. Jiansheng didn't stop because of this. Immediately after, the silver white light wind sword appeared in his hand. His body suddenly turned around beautifully, causing his long hair to flutter in the wind. At this time, a silver light flashed, and the light wind sword passed through Jiansheng's head at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye. Jiansheng's long hair that reached his waist was neatly cut off, leaving only the length of his shoulder. After that, Jiansheng immediately changed his clothes. He changed out of the expensive silk and satin that he originally wore and put on the rough clothes that he had just bought from the store. After dressing up, Jiansheng once again looked like a completely different person. Even if someone familiar with Jiansheng saw his current appearance, they wouldn't be able to recognize him. Jiansheng once again checked his body to make sure that he didn't miss anything. After making sure that his clothes were flawless, he set fire to his original clothes and walked out of the alley. When he arrived at the mercenary union again, Jiansheng directly went to the place where missions were accepted. The missions in the mercenary union were divided into 5 ranks: S, A, B, C, and D. The highest was S rank and the lowest was D. At the same time, the mercenaries were also divided into 5 ranks. Jiansheng was currently only a D rank mercenary, so he could only accept D rank missions. A mercenary's rank was determined by the amount of honor you accumulated from completing missions and your own strength. A D rank mercenary strength had to be at least at the saint level, while a C rank mercenary strength had to be at least at the great saint level. Based on this, an S rank mercenary strength had to be at least at the Earth Saint Master level. Even if one's strength had reached the Earth Saint Master level, without the corresponding honor points, It was impossible to become an S-rank mercenary. As a result, there were no shortcuts to becoming a mercenary. There were many D-rank missions, and many of them were extremely boring. If it wasn't to help someone find something lost in White Cloud City, it was to help a shop buy something or deliver something. None of these things caught Jinshin's interest. Right now, Jinshin's main goal was to find a mission that would allow him to leave the Kingdom of Jessin. He knew that the Huayan sect's influence in the Kingdom of Jessin was just too great. Although his disguise was flawless, no one could guarantee that his identity would be exposed and he would be hunted down by the Huayan sect. Right now, the best method was to leave the Kingdom of Jessin. No matter how great the Huayan sect's influence was, it was still limited to the Kingdom of Jessin. It was a pity that there were very few D-rank missions that required a mercenary to leave the country. This was because the missions that required a mercenary to leave the country were of a higher level. At the very least, they wouldn't be assigned to D-rank missions. As a result, Jinshin couldn't find a single D-rank mission even after looking through all of them. Chapter 70. After leaving the mercenary union, Jinshin directly arrived at a place where the merchants gathered in White Cloud City. The place was extremely spacious, so it was where the merchants store their goods. At the same time, the place was heavily guarded, so there was no need to worry about being stolen. When Jinshin arrived, there were already many merchants bustling about. Everyone was preparing to leave. At the same time, there were many mercenaries riding various magical beasts. Of course, there were also some mercenaries riding horses. Horses were the most common and cheapest form of transportation on the Tianyuan continent. At the same time, they were also the lowest form of transportation. At this moment, a young man who was busy moving goods passed by Jinshin. Jinshin immediately extended his hand to stop him and asked, "Brother, may I ask which of these merchants are leaving the Kingdom of Jessin?" The young man glanced at Jinshin in some doubt before pointing at a larger group of merchants in the distance. "That group is leaving the Kingdom of Jessin." Jinshin glanced in the direction the young man was pointing at. He saw several dozen carriages filled with goods parked there. There's a large group of mercenaries guarding the goods in the surroundings. A middle-aged man in luxurious robes was directing the workers. Jinshin could tell with a single glance that the middle-aged man was the person in charge of the merchant group. He immediately walked over and arrived before the middle-aged man. He asked, "Uncle, may I ask if your merchant group is leaving the Kingdom of Jessin?" The middle-aged man studied Jinshin cautiously when he heard that. He asked, "Why are you asking this?" Jinshin chuckled, "Uncle, if your merchant group is leaving the Kingdom of Jessin, can I join you? I'm not very powerful, but I'm still a first-class mercenary. I don't want any payment from you either. So is that all right?" The middle-aged man looked relieved and said indifferently, "Sure, but you have to follow us closely on the road. Also, you have to pay for the expenses along the way. We won't reimburse you for any expenses. If there are bandits blocking the way, you have to contribute and fight with us." On the Tianyuan continent, some of the weaker mercenaries would usually form groups or join large merchant groups if they wanted to travel between kingdoms. Not only was the journey between kingdoms extremely long, but it was also extremely dangerous. Not only would there be bandits on the continent at any time, but there would also be magical beasts. In certain special environments, it would even be very common to be attacked by magical beasts. As a result, almost every merchant group or mercenary group would welcome anyone who wanted to join them. Normally, they would not turn anyone away. After all, an extra person was an extra source of strength. Just a little bit of strength might be enough to save their lives. Jinshin agreed to the middle-aged man's request without any hesitation. "Our merchant group will set off in an hour. Go prepare yourself." With that, the middle-aged man no longer paid any attention to Jinshin. He continued to instruct the young men to move the goods. With that, Jinshin immediately hurried to a place in White Cloud City that specialized in selling mounts. After spending 50 gold coins on a good horse, he returned to where the merchant group had gathered and quietly waited for the merchant group to set off. An hour passed very quickly. Jinshin rode his mount and followed behind the merchant group, slowly making his way to the city gates. Although many of the mercenaries in charge of escorting the merchant group cast curious gazes at Jianshin, no one asked him about his origins. This was because this large caravan was made up of 3 medium-sized caravans. Due to the long journey and unknown dangers, the 3 caravans had hired 3 mercenary groups, and many of them were individual mercenaries. The total number of mercenaries and coachmen was no less than 500. It was normal for them to encounter unfamiliar faces. Very soon, Jianshan followed the merchant group to the gates of White Cloud City. Naturally, the person in charge of the merchant group would negotiate with the guards there. The merchant group did not stay there for long. Once they were done, the merchant group slowly set off from the city. Wait a moment. At this moment, a middle-aged man in armor quickly walked down from the tower. He held a scroll of paper in his hand. The middle-aged man directly arrived before the city gates, and then he passed the scroll in his hand to a guard and said, "Paste this portrait on the city gates. At the same time, get the best artist in White Cloud City to draw the person in the portrait and paste it on the streets and alleys of the city. Capture anyone who looks like the person in the portrait immediately. Kill them without mercy if they resist." "Yes, Commander. Commander." A guard immediately took the scroll of paper from the middle-aged man and opened it before pasting it on the city walls. "The person in the portrait is a fugitive of the Jessin Kingdom. All of you, keep a close eye on the people in the portrait. Compare them to the person in the portrait. Don't ever let the fugitive escape. Do you understand?" The middle-aged man ordered loudly again. His voice was so loud that even some people who were far away could hear him clearly. When the guard pasted the portrait on the city walls, the person in the portrait appeared before everyone's eyes. It was a young man who seemed to be in his teens, at most in his 20s. The young man had a dignified appearance and was extremely handsome. Although it was only a portrait, the person in the portrait was extremely lifelike, just like a real person. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that the person who drew the portrait was extremely skilled. Only after the portrait was pasted on the city walls did the commander wave his hand. He said to the waiting merchant group, "All right, you can all go." The caravan blocking the city gate continued to move out of the city, but this time, the number of guards guarding the city gate had increased by several times. The original dozen guards had increased to over 100. Every person entering or leaving the city gate would be stopped by the guards and then compared with the portraits pasted on the city wall. When Jianshan passed by the city gates and saw the portrait on the city walls, his gaze suddenly froze. That was because the person in the portrait was actually his original appearance. Seeing this, Jianshan couldn't help being shocked by the Huayan sect's strength. This place was over 10,000 kilometers away from Lore City. He had only left Lore City yesterday morning and arrived at White Cloud City in the evening. During this time, not only did the Huayan sect perfectly draw his appearance, they even sent it to White Cloud City in such a short time. Just this kind of efficiency was enough to cause one to tremble. Furthermore, Jianshin didn't believe that the Huayan sect only wanted him in White Cloud City. Right now, all the cities in the Kingdom of Jessin had already received his wanted list. Thinking of this, Jianshin couldn't help but inwardly rejoice that he had already changed his appearance. Otherwise, if he was recognized with his current strength, it would be very difficult for him to leave White Cloud City. Jianshan rode on his horse and followed the merchant group out of the city. Just as he passed by the city gates, the guards on both sides of the gates cast sharp gazes on his face. However, Jianshan's appearance had already undergone a complete transformation. Even if someone familiar with Jianshan walked in front of him, they wouldn't be able to recognize him, let alone these guards who had never seen him before. Without any obstructions, Jianshan blended into the merchant group as a mercenary and smoothly left White Cloud City. Then, the merchant group continued to move forward along the trade route like a long dragon. This large merchant group was made up of 3 medium-sized merchant groups. Their destination was the Blue Wind Empire, which was the closest to the Kingdom of Jessin. As the merchant group was carrying large carts of goods, their speed wasn't very fast. Even though White Cloud City was very close to the border fortress of the Kingdom of Jessin, it would take at least 2 to 3 days to reach the border fortress. As for the journey to the Blue Wind Empire, it would take at least half a month. Jinshin's gaze landed on a luxurious carriage in the distance. Not only was this carriage larger, but was also pulled by 4 Tier 1 demonic beasts that were good at running. Around the carriage were several powerful mercenaries riding on demonic beasts. Moreover, the middle-aged man who agreed to let Jinshin join the merchant group was also around. It seemed like they were all guarding the luxurious carriage. Jinshin could vaguely guess that the person sitting in the carriage was either the boss of the merchant group or someone important. This was because there were only 2 such luxurious carriages in the entire merchant group. After traveling on the official road for 4 days, the merchant group finally arrived at the border fortress of the Kingdom of Jessen. The border fortress of the Kingdom of Jessen was a huge wall that stretched for several miles. It was more than 50 meters tall and 20 meters thick. From afar, it looked like a giant dragon that was entrenched on the ground. It was an awe-inspiring sight. When Jinshin arrived in front of the wall, a huge shadow instantly enveloped him. The 50-meter-tall wall completely blocked the setting sun, causing the light in front of the wall to dim. The majestic aura was enough to shock anyone who saw this wall for the first time. It was as if the thing in front of them was a terrifying monster in the deep sea. Jinshin raised his head to look at the wall that served as the first line of defense for the Kingdom of Jessen. He was extremely shocked. He had seen many walls in his past life, but none of them could compare to the one before him. Even the largest wall he had seen in the past was only 20 meters tall. Compared to the 50-meter wall before him, Wu Ning was like an adult compared to a child. What a huge wall! Who knows how long it took to build such a huge wall? Jinshin sighed as he looked at the wall before him. A mounted mercenary next to Jinshin curled his lips in disdain. He glanced at Jinshin and smiled. The scale of this wall can only be considered average in the Tianyuan continent. Almost every kingdom has one. With that, the mercenary looked at Jinshin from head to toe and continued. You probably haven't been to the 3 great empires yet. Let me tell you, the border fortresses of the 3 empires have walls that are 100 meters tall and 50 meters thick. They are much more majestic than this. This wall can't compare to them at all. Jinshin turned his head to look at the mercenary who had just spoken. He was in his 20s and had a common face. His skin was rather dark, and he wore coarse clothes. He seemed very ordinary. If there's a chance in the future, you must visit the 3 great empires. Jinshin chuckled. Chapter 71. Jinshin faintly smiled. He clasped his hands at the mercenary and said, Looks like you've been on the Tianyuan continent for quite some time. The mercenary smiled faintly. It's not that long. It's only been a few years. It's nowhere near as long as the mercenaries who have been on the Tianyuan continent for decades, or even centuries. May I ask for your name? Jinshin asked again. I'm Mu Yun. What about you? The mercenary was clearly a rather easygoing person. I'm Jinshin, Jinshin replied. He had already decided that he would use the name Jinshin on the Tianyuan continent in the future. Afterward, Jinshin and Mu Yun began to chat casually. They talked about a few interesting things that had happened on the Tianyuan continent. Although this was the first time Jinshin had ventured out, he had basically learned a few of the not-so-secretive matters of the Tianyuan continent from his time in Kargath Academy. Jinshin even knew a few things that had happened in the past. Mu Yun, on the other hand, had spent quite a few years on the Tianyuan continent, so he was extremely experienced. The 2 of them could be said to be mutually beneficial, so they talked very enthusiastically along the way. Unknowingly, the 2 of them had become even closer. When the caravan slowly passed through the huge gates of the fortress, Jinshin discovered a few portraits of himself on the walls. The words Changyang Shoten were written at the bottom of the portraits. The bounty on the portraits was extremely generous as well. If they found traces or clues of Changyang Shoten and were confirmed to be correct, they would be rewarded with 1,000 purple coins. If they used the traces or clues to capture Changyang Shoten, the person who reported the information would receive an additional 4,000 purple coins. A single gold coin was enough to feed a family of 3 for a month. A single purple coin could be exchanged for 100 gold coins. 1,000 purple coins was an extremely large amount of wealth to the majority of mercenaries. It was enough for them to buy a house in the city and live a carefree life. As a result, this reward was an irresistible temptation to the majority of mercenaries. The most tempting reward was undoubtedly the last one. Anyone who captured Changyang Shodan and handed him over to the Huayan sect would immediately receive 100,000 purple coins. Looking at the generous reward that was enough to move anyone, a cold light flashed through Jinshin's indifferent eyes. Huayan sect, you really think too highly of me. You actually gave me such generous rewards. Not only did you place a bounty on me in the entire kingdom of Jessen, even the mercenary union has issued a mission for me. Jinshin sneered inside. However, he also felt a deep sense of helplessness. On the Tianyuan continent, everything depended on strength. Right now, his strength was insufficient. Faced with the Huayan sect's bounty, he could only change his identity and leave his home, the place he grew up in, and the kingdom of Jessen. Let alone him, even the Chanyang Prefecture, one of the 4 great clans of Lore City, had no way to reverse the situation. Sigh. Jinshin inwardly sighed. At this moment, he couldn't help but think of his mother, Bai Yuntian's reluctant and sorrowful appearance when he left. Thinking of this, Jinshin's eyes revealed a trace of warmth that he had never felt before. However, his eyes immediately became resolute. At this moment, he had already decided that in the future, he would wholeheartedly focus on cultivation to increase his strength. Otherwise, with the Huayan sect as large as before, he would never be able to return to the kingdom of Jessen. He would never be able to see his mother again, and he would never be able to continue enjoying this hard-earned motherly love. In his previous life, Jinshin had been an orphan. He had never experienced the care and concern of his family. Now, not only had the heavens allowed him to reincarnate, they had even bestowed upon him a happy family. In Jinshin's heart, he greatly cherished this hard-earned motherly love and those family members who had truly cared for him. Some people who had lived in happy families since childhood might not be able to understand Jinshin's feelings. However, after being alone for his entire life, Jinshin greatly desired to have family. After all, it was unavoidable for a person to feel a little lonely. On both sides of the gate, there were nearly 200 soldiers standing guard. Their sharp eyes swept over the faces of everyone who passed through the gate. Once they discovered someone whose face they couldn't see clearly, they would be stopped by these guards and carefully compared to the portraits pasted on the wall. Only after confirming that there were no mistakes would they be allowed to leave. Although many of the people stopped were mercenaries with decent strength, they didn't dare to act rashly in front of the border stronghold of the kingdom of Jessen. This was because there were several 100,000 soldiers in the stronghold, and there was no lack of experts among them. If they were to clash with the guards here, their fates could be imagined. The gate of the stronghold was extremely large. Even if 5 carriages were to travel side by side, it wouldn't feel crowded at all. Just as Jinshin's caravan was about to leave the stronghold, a smaller caravan caught up with them at a much faster speed than Jinshin's caravan. When they saw the portraits pasted on the wall of the stronghold, they immediately began to discuss among themselves. Who is the person in the portrait? Why is there a bounty for him everywhere? I didn't expect that even the border stronghold of the kingdom of Jessen would have his portrait pasted on the wall. It seems like this person must have committed many serious crimes. When I passed by 3 cities, his portrait was pasted all over the city. Now, even the mercenary union has issued a bounty for him. That's right. It seems like this person must have committed some serious crime or offended some big shot. Right now, the mercenary union has already raised the bounty for him to an A-rank mission. Furthermore, they have also removed the requirement for mercenaries to accept this mission. This way, even a D-rank mercenary can accept this mission. That's right. That's right. And the commission is extremely high. As long as you find traces of Chanyang Xiangtian, you'll be rewarded with 1,000 purple coins. If you catch someone based on the traces, you'll be rewarded with an additional 4,000 purple coins. What is a mere few thousand? If you can directly capture him and send him to the Huayan sect, you can directly receive 100,000 purple gold. 100,000? Just thinking about it is frightening. I don't think I will be able to earn 100,000 purple gold in my lifetime." Hearing the discussions of the caravan, Mu Yun, who had been chatting enthusiastically with Jianshan, also became interested. Turning his head to look at the portrait pasted on the city gate, he chuckled and said, "I wonder what crime this person called Changyang Shoten committed for the Huayan sect to go through so much trouble to capture him. If he was a big shot with great strength, then it would make sense. But on the wanted list, it clearly states that he is only a primary saint. This is very strange. Could it be that a primary saint could do something that would make the Huayan sect so hateful? Could it be that this person called Changyang Shoten peeked at the daughter of the Huayan sect's sectmaster taking a bath?" Hearing Mu Yun's mutterings, Jianshan couldn't help but laugh. He helplessly looked at Mu Yun and said with a smile, "Brother Mu Yun, I have stayed in the kingdom of Jessen for more than 10 years and have heard a lot about the Huayan sect. But according to what I know, the Huayan sectmaster only has one son and no daughter. Peeking at the daughter of the Huayan sectmaster taking a bath is a bit unreasonable." Mu Yun rolled his eyes at Jianshan and said, "What do you know? Who said that the Huayan sectmaster doesn't have a daughter? Perhaps he just happens to have one. It's just that the outside world doesn't know about it." Jianshan helplessly shook his head. In his heart, he decided not to continue discussing the matter of whether or not the Huayan sectmaster had a daughter. The caravan didn't encounter any obstructions and smoothly left the stronghold. After Jianshan's disguise, no one could recognize his true appearance. Moreover, this disguise technique was very high. Even though Jianshan had only used some ordinary materials to disguise himself, it was still flawless. No one could see through his disguise. Moreover, this disguise technique was something that had been passed down in Jianshan's previous world. Although it seemed simple, it was actually very profound and not easy to learn. In this world, there was probably no such disguise technique, so naturally no one would think of it. Jianshan's face didn't reveal any flaws, so he didn't have to worry about anyone seeing through his disguise. After leaving the stronghold, there was an endless plain. There were very few people on the plain, only scattered caravans walking on the road. This plain wasn't under the jurisdiction of any empire and was a chaotic area. This led to the frequent appearance of bandits and robbers. The caravans walking on this plain were either in groups or escorted by powerful mercenaries. This plain was very vast. The caravan walked on the plain for an entire day and only covered a quarter of the plain. If they wanted to reach the Fenglan Empire, they would have to cross this plain and then pass through a mountain range to reach the Fenglan Empire stronghold. With the caravan's slow speed, it would take them at least 10 days to reach the Fenglan Empire stronghold. After all, the caravan was carrying large caravans of goods, and the road wasn't very smooth. Even if they wanted to speed up, they couldn't. When the sky darkened, the caravan stopped moving forward and camped in a relatively flat place. Nearly 100 tents surrounded the caravan, which was full of goods. Some of the coachmen skillfully unloaded the caravan and fed the horses. Smoke rose in spirals around the tents. Many of the mercenaries were sitting in groups of 3 or 5, chatting while making a fire to roast the meat of magical beasts or cooking some food to fill their stomachs. But among them, if they didn't know each other, then they belonged to the same mercenary group. Most of the mercenaries who were alone were silently sitting on the side, eating the dry food that they had prepared beforehand. Jianshan also took out a tent that he had prepared beforehand from a space belt and then found a flat and dry place to set it up. As a mercenary group that didn't belong to any mercenary group and wasn't on the list of hired members of the caravan, Jianshan was completely responsible for all the consumption and necessities along the way. The caravan wouldn't give him any help. Just as Jianshan's tent was set up, Mu Yun suddenly appeared in front of Jianshan and said, "Jianshan, it seems that you also joined the caravan halfway. Where are you going?" Jianshan nodded and said, "I'm going to the Blue Moon Empire. Brother Mu Yun, what about you?" Chapter 72. At night, Jianshan entered his tent after eating some rations. He sat down and cultivated with a few Class 1 monster cores in his hand. He could encounter danger at any time on the Tianyuan continent. Only with great strength could he ensure his safety. As a result, Jianshan did not want to waste any time on increasing his strength. Moreover, Jianshan knew that he could only return to the kingdom of Jessen and reunite with his family once he became powerful enough to not fear the Huayan sect. Otherwise, he would probably be hunted down by the Huayan sect as soon as he showed his face. It was extremely quiet outside. Only a few light footsteps could be heard from time to time. These were the mercenaries in charge of patrolling the area as they passed by Jinshan's tent. Time passed by quietly, and in the blink of an eye, it was already late at night. At this time, most of the mercenaries in the tents had already entered a state of deep sleep. Even the mercenaries in charge of patrolling the tents had drowsy looks and were in a very lax state. At this moment, a black streak of light suddenly appeared. Using the cover of the night, it quickly flew over from the distance and shot straight at one of the patrolling mercenaries. In the end, it silently struck the mercenary's throat. The black streak of light was clearly a kind of killing force. The mercenary did not even have the chance to cry out before his body collapsed to the ground. The black streak of light was extremely small and extremely fast. It was completely silent as it flew, making it difficult for anyone to detect it. Moreover, the merchant camp was extremely large, and the patrolling mercenary was far away by himself. As a result, no one noticed what had happened after he fell to the ground. After the mercenary fell to the ground, several more black streaks of light quickly shot over from the distance, killing all the patrolling mercenaries who were further away from the tent. Jianshan's tent was located at the outermost perimeter. Among the dead mercenaries, there just happened to be one that was less than 30 meters away from Jianshan's tent. Just as the mercenary that was closest to Jianshan's tent fell to the ground, Jianshan's ears slightly twitched as he sat cross-legged in his tent cultivating. His slightly closed eyes abruptly opened, and his eyes turned. Immediately after, Jianshan immediately bent over and carefully opened a gap in the tent's door to observe the situation outside. Just as Jianshan opened the door slightly to see what was happening outside, another black streak of light shot over from the distance at an extremely fast speed. It struck a patrolling mercenary in the distance, and the mercenary fell to the ground without making a single sound. Seeing this, Jianshan's expression changed slightly. He immediately understood that the merchant group had been attacked. However, with the experience of his past life, Jianshan did not panic at all. He immediately shouted from the tent, "Everyone, be careful! There's an enemy attack!" Jianshan's shout was extremely loud, and everyone in the camp could hear it clearly. As soon as he finished speaking, the originally quiet camp immediately became noisy. Countless mercenaries quickly ran out of their tents. In just a short moment, the originally quiet camp was filled with hundreds of noisy mercenaries. Jianshan's words were extremely sensitive to the mercenaries who had been roaming the Tianyuan continent for a long time. As a result, when they heard Jianshan's shout, all the mercenaries ran out of their tents as quickly as possible. The mercenaries who had just run out of their tents habitually scanned their surroundings, but all they saw were their own people. They did not see any traces of the enemy. Enemy attack? Where is the enemy? Who was shouting just now? Where is the enemy? Where is the enemy? Who the F***CK was shouting randomly? Many mercenaries began to shout loudly. If they were to discover that someone was shouting randomly to mess with them, they would not easily let this person off. Not good, Captain Lang Tian. The patrolling Du Mulan has died. Just as many mercenaries were cursing, a loud voice drowned out all the curses of the mercenaries and rang out from afar. Hearing this, all the mercenaries fell silent. However, at this moment, another 3 black streaks of light shot over from the darkness at an extremely fast speed and struck the chests of 3 mercenaries. The mercenaries who were struck by the black streaks of light did not even have the chance to cry out before directly falling to the ground. Before the 3 mercenaries could fall to the ground, another 3 black streaks of light shot out from the darkness and struck the 3 mercenaries again. The black streaks of light constantly shot over from afar. Using the cover of the night and their completely silent flight, it was difficult to discover their existence. The black streaks of light shot out at an extremely fast rate. In less than a breath's time, over a dozen mercenaries were struck by the black streaks of light and fell to the ground. At this moment, someone finally cried out, "Everyone be careful, there's an enemy." Before the mercenary could finish his sentence, a black streak of light flashed by and shot straight into the mercenary's body. Afterward, the mercenary powerlessly fell to the ground. Everyone quickly scatter and find cover. A tall, middle-aged man with a scar on his face roared. He was dressed in a tight suit and had a tall build. After he finished speaking, a pair of fiery red hammers appeared in the middle-aged man's hands, and he rushed alone in the direction of the black streaks of light. "Captain Lang Tian, be careful." Seeing the middle-aged man actually rushing alone in the direction of the enemy, many mercenaries cried out in alarm one after another. Their voices were filled with worry. Just as the middle-aged man rushed out a few steps, over a dozen mercenaries who boasted of their strength rushed out and followed closely behind the middle-aged man. They formed a fan shape and rushed in the direction of the black streaks of light. The black streaks of light were still constantly flickering, but this time, the shooting angle of the black streaks of light had changed their target. Under the cover of the night, the undetectable black streaks of light were like sharp swords that shot towards the dozen mercenaries who were rushing over. However, since they dared to recklessly charge forward without knowing the enemy's situation, the strength of these mercenaries was definitely not weak. Leader Lang Tian, who was leading the charge, held a pair of fiery red hammers in his hands that flickered with a flame-like red glow. In the pitch-black night, the hammers were like bright lamps that were so eye-catching. Seeing the two streaks of black streaks of light shooting towards him, Captain Lang Tian's eyes revealed a cold smile. He suddenly swung the hammers in his hands and fiercely smashed them towards the two streaks of black streaks of light. With a light collision sound, Captain Lang Tian's hammers accurately struck the two streaks of black streaks of light. Afterwards, the black streaks of light silently disappeared. The black streaks of light that could easily take a person's life were actually so weak in Captain Lang Tian's hands. The dozen or so mercenaries following behind Captain Lang Tian were also extremely powerful. They did not fear the threat of the black streaks of light at all. Immediately, powerful Saint force surged out from the Saint weapons in their hands, and they directly dispersed the black streaks of light with a wave of their Saint weapons. Just at this moment, a strange change occurred. Sharp, ear-piercing sounds of air being pierced rang out from the darkness in the distance. Countless arrows were shot over with ear-piercing sounds. There were so many arrows that they were as dense as locusts. Facing so many arrows, a few of the dozen or so mercenaries immediately stopped their charge and blocked the incoming arrows. Ding, 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 ding. These arrows were all made of refined iron. When they collided with the Saint weapons, the sound of metal clanging rang out. Captain Lang Tian and the mercenaries still did not stop their charge. Facing the dense rain of arrows, the mercenaries all roared out angrily. Powerful Saint force surged out of their bodies, forming a barrier completely condensed from Saint force around them. Although this barrier was weak, its defensive power was extremely strong. When the arrows made of refined iron struck their barrier, they could only cause it to tremble slightly. They were simply unable to break through this layer of defense. Brothers kill. Just as the powerful mercenaries were about to charge into the enemy's camp, a loud and clear shout rang out from the darkness in the distance. Following the shout, earth-shaking battle cries rang out. In the darkness, a large number of black figures could be faintly seen suddenly appearing, rapidly charging towards the caravan's camp. The bandits have appeared. Everyone, prepare your bows and arrows. In the mercenary camp, a mercenary loudly shouted. Hearing this, many mercenaries immediately took out the iron longbows on their backs and nocked arrows. They aimed at the black figures in the distance, waiting for the bandits to enter the range of their arrows. Jianshin stood at the periphery of the group of mercenaries and looked at the black figures in the distance. His expression became a little solemn. Although the bandits were still far away from the camp and visibility was very low due to the darkness, with his eyesight and experience, he immediately determined that there were at least a few hundred bandits. They were not much fewer than the mercenaries in the caravan. Moreover, The few powerful mercenaries who had charged forward against the rain of arrows had already been dealt with by the experts in the enemy camp. Release the arrows. At this time, the bandits had already entered the range of the arrows. With the order of one person, the hundreds of mercenaries immediately released the arrows in their hands. Immediately, hundreds of iron arrows pierced through the air and shot towards the bandits in front. Although there were some powerful people in this group of bandits, most of them were not that strong. In just one round of arrow rain, more than a dozen of the bandits had fallen. 3 black streaks of light shot out from behind the group of bandits at an extremely fast speed, directly hitting the chest of 3 bow-wielding mercenaries. A finger-sized hole immediately appeared on the chest of the 3 mercenaries who were hit by the black streaks of light. They immediately fell to the ground and breathed their last. The black streaks of light shot out at an extremely fast rate, and each time there were 3 streaks of light. In just a short moment, 9 mercenaries had died under the black streaks of light. Seeing the wounds on the mercenaries' chests, a middle-aged man's face suddenly changed. He immediately called out, "Everyone be careful. There's someone with darkness-attributed saint force in the enemy camp." As he spoke, another 3 black streaks of light shot out from the night sky. One of the black streaks of light just happened to be aimed at the middle-aged man who had called out to warn everyone. The middle-aged man's strength was obviously not weak. His face sank, and a silver machete appeared in his right hand in an instant. With a flash of a machete, the middle-aged man had already swung down the machete in his right hand, slashing at the incoming black light. Bang! The black streak of light was completely condensed from energy. When the black streak of light collided with the machete in the middle-aged man's hand, there was a soft explosion. Afterward, the black streak of light silently dispersed. The middle-aged man's body swayed slightly, and his face immediately became stern. He said in a deep voice, "God damn it, there's actually 3 darkness-attributed saint force in the enemy camp, and they're all professional archers. In this region, only the Boundless Bandits have such strength." Vice Captain Liu, what did you say? Are these bandits from the Boundless Bandits? Heavens, they're actually from the Boundless Bandits. Chapter 73. As soon as they heard the words Boundless Bandits, all the mercenaries' expressions changed drastically. Boundless Bandits. Jinshin's brows furrowed deeply. He was no stranger to the Boundless Bandits. Back then, whether it was in the library of Chanyang Prefecture or in the library of Kargath Academy, he had read about the Boundless Bandits. According to the description of the Boundless Bandits in the books, they were extremely powerful and had existed for over 200 years. 200 years ago, when the Boundless Bandits were first born, they were already very powerful and would often appear in the borders of the surrounding kingdoms. At that time, the Boundless Bandits were a nightmare to all the caravans. This was because the Boundless Bandits were very ruthless. They never left any caravans alive after robbing them, and countless merchants and mercenaries had died at their hands. Moreover, the Boundless Bandits would occasionally attack some villages and cities with weak defenses. There was once a time when 2 Grade 3 cities were plundered by the Boundless Bandits, while a Grade 2 city was attacked by the Boundless Bandits. Although they did not manage to capture the Grade 2 city in the end, they still caused a lot of casualties in the Grade 2 city. More than a dozen villages were massacred. At that time, the Boundless Bandits had caused a bloodbath in the surrounding kingdoms, causing caravans to not dare to go to remote places and causing great losses to the various kingdoms. Because of this, the 4 kingdoms, the Kingdom of Jessen, the Kingdom of Blue Moon, the Kingdom of Wind, and the Kingdom of Walla, had gone to war. After sending people to investigate the Boundless Bandits' lair, they had sent troops to encircle and annihilate the Boundless Bandits several times. Unfortunately, the Boundless Bandits' strength was beyond everyone's expectations. Every encirclement and annihilation by the various kingdoms ended in failure and heavy casualties. After a few failed encirclements and annihilations, the various kingdoms actually sent out a top expert at the same time. A total of 4 top experts were gathered to head to the Boundless Bandits' stronghold, the Boundless Mountains. Not long after the top experts of the 4 kingdoms entered the Boundless Mountains, an earth-shattering explosion was heard from the depths of the mountains. The entire boundless mountains shook and collapsed. The explosion lasted for a full day and night before it gradually calmed down. During this time, 6 towering peaks of the boundless mountains collapsed. When the top experts of the 4 kingdoms came out, the 4 of them did not look very good. They left without saying anything. Within a day, the commanders of the 4 kingdoms who encircled the boundless mountains received an order from the king to immediately withdraw their troops and stop the encirclement and annihilation of the boundless mountains. Although no one saw with their own eyes what happened after the top experts of the 4 kingdoms entered the depths of the boundless mountains, anyone with half a brain could guess what exactly happened. This outcome was unacceptable to all the mercenaries and merchant groups. From then on, the Boundless Bandits' reputation rose to a peak. In the hearts of some mercenaries and merchants, the Boundless Bandits had become the incarnation of the Grim Reaper, deterring the surrounding kingdoms. However, the only thing that made everyone feel fortunate was that after the incident with the top experts of the 4 kingdoms, the Boundless Bandits had become much more low-key. Although there were still many merchants and mercenaries who died in their hands every year, the Boundless Bandits' appearance was not as frequent as before. They would only appear once a month, and their methods were not as ruthless as before. This gave many merchants a chance to survive. However, the only downside was that the Boundless Bandits' appearance was uncertain. Therefore, even if some merchant groups wanted to avoid the Boundless Bandits, they could not figure out the exact time. Damn it! So what if it's the Boundless Bandits? I'll still chop off their heads. A mercenary glared at the Boundless Bandits in the distance with eyes full of hatred, not showing the slightest fear. In addition to him, many other mercenaries were also looking at the Boundless Bandits with eyes full of deep hatred and resentment. The Boundless Bandits had run amok in this area, robbing countless merchant groups and killing countless merchants and mercenaries over the years. Therefore, many of these mercenaries had relatives and friends who had died in the hands of the Boundless Bandits. In the hearts of these mercenaries, there was only deep hatred for the Boundless Bandits, and not the slightest bit of fear. As mercenaries who lived on the edge of the blade all year round, there were also many hot-blooded and unyielding men among them. Not everyone was afraid of death. More than a decade ago, my father died in the hands of the Boundless Bandits. Today, I'll avenge my father. A mercenary in his 20s stared at the approaching Boundless mercenary group with bloodshot eyes. His tone was filled with grief, indignation, and intense hatred. A burly man with a valiant body and a bare upper body had eyes full of strong, killing intent. He gritted his teeth and said, "Boundless Bandits, you killed my elder brother 5 years ago. Today, even if I have to sacrifice my life, I'll drag you down with me and avenge my elder brother." The black light was still flashing. In just a short while, a few more mercenaries who were shooting arrows fell under this strange black light. The rest of the mercenaries found cover to avoid the black light, which was difficult to guard against, while shooting arrows at the rapidly approaching bandits. Seeing that the bandits were getting closer and closer, many of the mercenaries began to panic. The name Boundless Bandits had a huge impact on them. Many of them were scared out of their wits, and they didn't even have the courage to resist. After all, not everyone was fearless of death. There were still some among them who were timid and afraid of death. Noticing the situation of the mercenaries, a middle-aged man had a look of worry in his eyes. He shouted, "Don't be afraid, everyone. This is just a small unit of the Boundless Bandits. They are not necessarily stronger than us. As long as we work together, we will definitely be able to defeat them. Otherwise, the only thing that awaits us is death. Brothers, let's give it our all for the sake of survival." Hearing the middle-aged man's words, some of the cowardly mercenaries couldn't help but feel emboldened. These words were extremely motivating to some of them. Only by fighting would there be hope for survival. At this moment, the strong desire to survive made many of the mercenaries abandon the fear in their hearts and decide to fight to the death. The mercenaries tried their best to dodge the black light that was shooting at them from afar while shooting at the bandits in front of them with their bows and arrows. After nearly 100 people fell, the Boundless Bandits finally arrived in front of a group of mercenaries. At this time, The bows in the mercenaries' hands had already lost their effectiveness. All of the mercenaries abandoned their bows and arrows and summoned their holy weapons to fight the boundless bandits. Ah, ah! Battle cries shook the sky from the crowd. The collision of weapons was densely packed, and miserable shrieks were constantly heard. Behind the bandits, in the darkness that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, black light constantly streaked through the air. Every time, it would accurately hit a mercenary. In just a short period of time, dozens of mercenaries had already died to this black light. Leader and the others are being held back by the enemy experts. Carlo, Gusamir, the three of you come with me. We must hold back the three people hiding in the dark and shooting arrows. In the chaotic battlefield, a mercenary in armor shouted. As soon as he finished speaking, he leaped into the air and rushed in the direction of the black light. Just as the middle-aged man in armor left, another three mercenaries followed closely behind him and leaped into the air. Using the heads of the bandits as leverage, they rushed in the direction of the black light. Facing the four mercenaries who had leaped over their heads, the hundreds of bandits were actually helpless. Although the boundless bandit group's ferocious reputation had intimidated several kingdoms in the vicinity, this time, only a small group of bandits had come. Moreover, they weren't elites. The strongest among them had been blocked by the dozen or so experts who had rushed over earlier. At this moment, there was simply no one who could stop these four mercenaries who were not weak. Three black lights once again shot towards the four mercenaries from the darkness in the distance. Clearly, the three people with darkness attribute, Saint Force hiding in the distance, had discovered the intentions of the four mercenaries. Just as the three black streaks shot out, another three black streaks appeared. A total of 6 streaks of black streaks lined up in 2 rows and shot towards the four mercenaries at an extremely fast speed without making a sound. The strength of these 4 mercenaries wasn't weak. They were far stronger than the mercenaries on guard duty. A weapon appeared in their hands at the same time, and they swung their weapons at the incoming black light. When the two collided, the black light shattered and dissipated. The speed of the 4 mercenaries was only a little slower, and they continued to rush in the direction of the black light. The 4 of them were very clear that if they didn't get rid of the 3 people hiding in the dark, it would bring a huge loss to their camp. Although the 3 mercenary groups had several hundred people in total, they could only be regarded as a low-level mercenary group in the mercenary world of the Tianyuan continent. Most of the mercenaries in the groups were still at the level of saints and great saints. There were even very few people who had reached the level of saint masters. Only the captains and vice-captains possessed the strength of great saint masters. However, the 3 captains and vice-captains had already been occupied by the bandits in the enemy camp, so they were unable to deal with the 3 archers. As expected, when the 4 experts disappeared from everyone's sight, the black lights no longer shot over. It did not matter if the 4 experts were able to keep the 3 archers busy or not. They had at least bought some precious time for the mercenaries. After all, the black lights were silent and difficult to detect under the cover of the night. They were extremely fast as well, so some of the weaker mercenaries were unable to dodge them at all. Without any potential danger, the mercenaries no longer needed to be on guard against the black lights that could shoot at them at any time. They all unleashed their full battle prowess, clashing with the bandits in an intense battle. At that moment, all the mercenaries cast aside their fear of the bandits. For the sake of survival, all of them did their best to kill the bandits, all for the sake of obtaining the final victory. Deafening cries filled the battlefield as the sounds of weapons colliding constantly rang out. Blood quickly dyed the ground red from the splattering blood. In just a short while of battle, over a dozen people from both sides had already collapsed. Jinshin had now joined the battle as well. Even though he was only a saint, his battle prowess would definitely shock everyone. Jinshin used profound footwork as he dodged the attacks from all directions. A silver sword that was only 2 fingers wide and 1 meter long constantly stabbed out with lightning-like speed. His sword stabbed out so quickly that only a tiny flash of silver could be seen. It was impossible to see the sword with the naked eye. Chapter 74. Jianshun was dealing with a group of enemies on his own. The constant blood-curdling screams and the bloody scene in front of him had already become a common sight to him. It didn't leave any impression on him at all. Jianshun's sword continued to stab out as the boundless bandits fell one by one. In front of Jianshun's lightning-fast swordsmanship, the bandits who were on the same level as Jianshun simply couldn't last more than 3 moves. There were even quite a few who were directly stabbed in the throat by Jianshun. Although Jianshun's strength could only be considered as the weakest amongst the mercenaries, but in terms of the number of bandits he had killed, no one could compare to him. In just a few breaths of time, more than a dozen bandits had fallen under Jianshun's sword. Jianshun's silver-white light wind sword was already stained red with blood. Even so, Jianshun's coarse clothes were still clean and neat. There wasn't a single drop of blood on them, unlike the other mercenaries who were covered in blood. Unknowingly, Jianshun had already infiltrated deep into the bandit camp. Right now, within a 20-meter radius of him, there were only bandits from the Boundless Bandits. There wasn't a single mercenary present, and the mercenaries were all grouped up in groups of 3 to 5 to fight against the bandits. Kill! 3 bandits who were closest to Jianshun let out a battle cry as they rushed towards Jianshun. Raising their weapons, they slashed towards Jianshun's head. Jianshun quickly took a step forward. His movements were like that of a ghost as he arrived in front of one of the bandits. At the same time, the light wind sword in his hand became a red ray of light as it pierced towards the bandit's throat. Jianshun was already proficient in fast swordsmanship, so the speed of his sword was even faster. The bandit didn't even have time to react. All he could see was a red ray of light flashing past his throat. After that, he felt a slight numbness in his throat. It was as if something was blocking his throat, making it difficult for him to breathe. Following that, fresh red blood began to flow from his neck. The bandit didn't even have the chance to make a sound as his body slowly fell backwards. At the last moment, the bandit didn't even understand how he died. Perhaps he didn't even know that his throat had been pierced by Jianshun's lightning-fast sword. This was because Jianshun's swordsmanship was so fast that the bandit didn't even have time to react. Moreover, when the thin sword pierced through his throat, the bandit didn't feel any pain at all. After the light wind sword pierced through the bandit's throat, Jianshun's movements didn't slow down at all. At this time, the other 2 bandits were already in front of him, their weapons already slashing towards his body. Facing the attacks of the 2 bandits, Jianshun's expression didn't reveal the slightest trace of panic. His face was as calm as water as he immediately pulled out the light wind sword from the bandit's throat. With a mysterious footwork, his body moved 2 meters to the side like a ghost, dodging the attacks of the 2 bandits. At the same time, the blood-stained light wind sword in his hand pierced towards the throat of one of the bandits at a speed that the naked eye couldn't follow. The light wind sword didn't meet with any resistance and easily avoided the reaction of the bandit, stabbing deep into his throat. Just as the light wind sword was about to pierce the throat of the bandit, Jianshun immediately pulled it out and stabbed towards the 3rd bandit. Every strike of Jianshun's sword was extremely fast, to the point that the naked eye couldn't follow it. Almost no one in the same realm as him would be able to dodge his sword. As for the 3rd bandit, he couldn't even see the shadow of the sword before the light wind sword had already pierced through his throat. To Jianshun, killing people was already a common occurrence. The bloody scene in front of him was already a common occurrence, so he didn't even bat an eyelid. After dealing with the bandits, Jianshun didn't stop and continued to stab the bandits around him with his light wind sword. The battle was very fierce. At this critical moment that concerned their lives, no one could stay out of it. Even the coachmen who had not reached the Saint Realm had gathered in groups of 3 to 5. They gathered their strength and cooperated with some mercenaries to attack the bandits who were alone. The intense battle caused the number of people on both sides to decrease rapidly. Whether it was the bandits or the mercenaries, they all suffered extremely heavy casualties. Aside from Jianshun, who still maintained his clean clothes, everyone else was covered in blood. There were even a few people who were completely bathed in blood. They seemed like people made of blood, and their bodies were covered in wounds of various sizes. Although the bandits outnumbered the mercenaries by a lot, their individual strength and teamwork were far inferior to the mercenaries. As the two sides fought, the number of people who died was much higher than the number of mercenaries. Even so, the number of people on both sides could barely maintain a balance. Jianshun continued to weave through the bandits, calmly dodging the attacks coming from all directions. The light wind sword in his hand was completely stained with blood, and with every stab, it would either directly hit the heart of a bandit, killing them, or leave a deep wound on their body. The surrounding bandits couldn't do anything to Jianshun. Not only were they unable to see Jianshun's sword, they couldn't even hit him with their weapons. This was because there were many times when their weapons were about to hit Jianshun, Jianshun would always be able to dodge by a hair's breadth. As a result, the bandits couldn't even touch Jianshun's clothes. Instead, more and more people fell to Jianshun's sword. More and more bandits died at Jianshun's hands. Gradually, the surrounding bandits began to realize how powerful Jianshun was and began to deliberately distance themselves from him. After all, in a situation where they were no match for him, no one was willing to throw away their lives for nothing. "Sire, you have good skills. Let me have a go at you." At this time, a deep voice entered Jianshun's ears. Just as the voice fell, a light green light shot towards Jianshun at an extremely fast speed. Feeling the speed of the light green light and the powerful energy it emitted, Jianshun's expression suddenly changed. Just from this attack, he could tell that this person was very strong. So strong that even with his current strength, he didn't dare to face this person head-on. Otherwise, he was afraid that this person's attack would be enough to injure him. This light green light was very fast. In an instant, it had arrived in front of Jianshun. At the same time, Jianshun's expression became very dignified. He immediately controlled his body and tried his best to dodge to the side. The light green light almost brushed past Jianshun's shoulder and fiercely bombarded the ground. With a loud boom, a deep hole was created in the ground. Jianshun's figure quickly retreated and immediately pulled away from the opponent. In the blink of an eye, he had retreated 5 zhang away. When he stopped, Jianshun raised his head and looked. Although it was now dark, with the help of the stubbornly burning bonfire in the distance and his extraordinary eyesight, he could still clearly see the person in front of him. He saw that the person was a middle-aged man of about 30 or 40 years old. The middle-aged man had an average build and didn't look very strong. His appearance was also very ordinary. Coupled with the cloth clothes he was wearing, he looked like a very ordinary person. If you removed the large glaive in his right hand that was emitting a faint green light, then this middle-aged man in front of him looked like a completely ordinary person. There was nothing about him that could attract attention. Just as Jianshun was sizing up this middle-aged man, the middle-aged man's calm gaze was also sizing up Jianshun. At the same time, the middle-aged man said, "Your strength is very good. Your opponent should be me." The middle-aged man's voice was very calm. His gaze was fixed on Jianshun, as if there was only Jianshun in his eyes. He showed an indifferent expression to the sounds of killing all around him. Jianshun looked around and observed the surroundings. This middle-aged man clearly had quite a high status among the bandits. Ever since he appeared, all the bandits within a certain range of Jianshun all avoided him. Even though there were quite a few bandits around Jianshun, when they saw the middle-aged man facing off against Jianshun, none of them dared to approach him. They all went to find other mercenaries to fight. Jianshun's face became stern. He knew that this battle was definitely the first battle of life and death since he had come to this world. Even though he had gone through hundreds of battles and was confident that he was invincible among those of the same level, Jianshun did not have much confidence in killing this middle-aged man. Just from the strength of the middle-aged man's attack, Jianshun could tell that the middle-aged man's strength far exceeded his own. At the same time, the middle-aged man also possessed wind-attributed saint force. In terms of speed, he was no slower than Jianshun. The middle-aged man stared at Jianshun as he slowly picked up the large glaive that was slightly taller than him. A faint azure light revolved around the glaive as strands of wind revolved around the middle-aged man's body. Noticing the middle-aged man's movements, Jianshun's mind was on high alert as well. Even though he had mastered the profound footwork, he did not dare to be careless against an opponent who was much stronger than him. Moreover, the opponent had Saint Force of the Wind attribute and specialized in speed. Huh! Suddenly, the middle-aged man let out an explosive roar as he rushed towards Jianshan. The middle-aged man's speed was extremely fast and arrived in front of Jianshan in the blink of an eye. His glaive glowed with a brilliant azure light as it slashed towards Jianshan's neck at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye. Jianshan's head was slightly tilted to the side as the glaive brushed past his head. After the glaive passed, a few strands of black hair slowly fell to the ground. At the same time that his head was tilted to the side, Jianshan's body suddenly crouched as he took a large step forward. His body quickly leaned forward as he closed the distance between him and the middle-aged man. The light wind sword in his hand formed a blood-red ray of light as it pierced towards the middle-aged man's heart with lightning speed. Facing a middle-aged man who was much stronger than him, Jianshan had already used all of his strength in this attack. He didn't hold back in the slightest. The speed of the sword was so fast that it had almost reached the limit of what Jianshan was capable of. In an instant, the tip of the light wind sword had already reached the middle-aged man's chest. At the tip of the sword, Jianshan's sword chi had already pierced through the man's body. Seeing the tip of the light wind sword about to reach his chest, the middle-aged man's face changed greatly as his eyes were filled with disbelief. However, the middle-aged man's reaction was also very quick. At this critical moment, a large amount of Saint Force was released from his body and formed a powerful shockwave that collided with the light wind sword that was about to reach his chest. At the same time, a portion of his Saint Force formed a seemingly weak but extremely sturdy barrier around his body. Chapter 75. Like a hot knife through butter, the light wind sword pierced through the middle-aged man's Saint Force. Even so, the speed of the light wind sword was a bit slower than before. When the light wind sword pierced through the middle-aged man's Saint Force barrier, the light wind sword's tip paused for a moment before breaking through the barrier and continuing towards the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's 2 layers of defense only lasted for less than a breath of time before they were broken. Even so, it was enough to buy him enough time. By the time the light wind sword broke through the 2 layers of defense, the middle-aged man had already retreated a few meters away with the help of his wind-attributed Saint Force. The middle-aged man stood several meters away as he stared at Jianshan, who had already sheathed his sword. His face became serious as he muttered, "What a fast speed!" Jianshan calmly stared at the middle-aged man without saying a word. In his heart, he felt that it was a pity. That sword strike just now was already the limit of his strength. Moreover, it was also the fastest speed he could achieve. If his full-strength attack was dodged by the middle-aged man, then it would be very difficult for him to kill the middle-aged man. After all, the middle-aged man's strength was much higher than his own. Moreover, he had the Saint Force of the Wind element and was an expert in speed. It could be said that Jianshan had already lost the upper hand against the middle-aged man. No matter how exquisite his swordsmanship was, it would all be useless if it was not so fast that the opponent could not react to it. Moreover, Jianshan did not dare to clash with the middle-aged man in a head-on battle when the difference in strength was so great. Your strength should have reached the level of a Saint Master, right? Jianshan calmly stared at the middle-aged man and asked. The middle-aged man didn't hide anything and said, "Correct, my strength is indeed at the intermediate Saint Master level." The middle-aged man paused for a moment as he stared at Jianshan with a strange light in his eyes and asked, "You aren't very strong, and your Saint Force isn't of the wind element, but your sword strike just now was so fast that even I almost couldn't dodge it. I don't know how you managed to achieve such speed." The middle-aged man's voice was filled with curiosity. Right now, he really did want to know the answer to this question. As someone who possessed wind-attributed Saint Force, he would not care if someone surpassed him in any other aspect. However, if someone surpassed him in speed, it would be very difficult for him to just let it go, especially when the person who surpassed him in speed was weaker than him and did not possess wind-attributed Saint Force. The middle-aged man could not help but feel curious. "Sorry, I can't answer that question." Jianshan's voice was very calm. Hearing this, the middle-aged man's eyes turned cold, and he said coldly, "If you tell me what method you use to increase your speed, I can let you go today." Otherwise, humph, do you really think that you're a match for me with that little bit of speed? Whether I'm your opponent or not, you're welcome to try. Facing the middle-aged man's threat, Jianshan wasn't afraid at all. Instead, he exuded a strong fighting spirit. In his hand, the light wind sword was already dyed red with blood and emitted a hazy sword aura. The middle-aged man stared at Jianshan with a strange light in his eyes. In his heart, he still had some misgivings about Jianshan's sword strike because the speed of Jianshan's sword was so fast that even he couldn't match it. Even though he had the wind element, which gave him an innate advantage in terms of speed, he still couldn't unleash an attack as fast as Jianshan's. In order to dodge that sword strike, he had already used all of his strength. If he had been just a step slower, he didn't doubt that his heart would have been pierced through. Because of this, the middle-aged man was now somewhat afraid of Jianshan. Moreover, the middle-aged man looked at Jianshan's spiritual energy cloak and couldn't tell how many times Jianshan could unleash such a fast attack. If Jianshan could unleash an endless stream of attacks at the same speed, then the middle-aged man would have a hard time dealing with it. Seeing that the middle-aged man wasn't attacking, Jianshan was happy to be at ease. Just like that, he faced off against the middle-aged man. Jianshan was extremely clear that it was basically impossible for him to kill the middle-aged man when the middle-aged man wasn't any slower than him. Right now, he could only keep the middle-aged man busy so that he wouldn't kill the weaker mercenaries. Once the experts of the mercenary group returned, he would directly throw the middle-aged man to them to deal with. The battle in the field didn't stop because of Jianshan and the middle-aged man standoff. The sounds of killing continued, and more corpses of mercenaries and bandits fell to the ground. The ground was completely dyed red with blood, and there were even small puddles of blood on the uneven ground. The bandits were still fighting with all their might. Those who were able to survive until the end were either smart or had outstanding strength. Currently, the number of mercenaries and bandits was still at a relatively balanced stage. After the middle-aged man and Jianshan standoff, the middle-aged man finally made his move again. The large glaive in his hand emitted a light green light, and in the darkness of the night, it was like a bright light. Holding the 2-meter-long glaive, the middle-aged man once again rushed towards Jianshan. Seeing the middle-aged man rushing towards him, Jianshan's eyes flashed with a sharp light. His right hand gripped the light wind sword even tighter as he took the initiative to meet the middle-aged man head-on. The middle-aged man raised his faintly glowing glaive and directly swung it down at Jianshan's head. He moved extremely quickly. Facing the attack of a mid-level Saint Master, Jianshan didn't plan to meet it head-on. Instead, he nimbly dodged the attack and counterattacked. But just as Jianshan's sword was about to strike out, the middle-aged man's glaive suddenly changed direction in midair. With a whistling sound, the glaive flew towards Jianshan's light wind sword. Jianshan's face slightly changed as he immediately pulled back his light wind sword. From the beginning to the end, he didn't want to meet the glaive head-on. Jianshan's light wind sword was his life-bound saint weapon. His entire life was tied to this seemingly weak light wind sword. If the light wind sword was damaged, then not only would Jianshan lose all of his martial arts, his life would also be in danger. In the Tianyuan continent, there were many cases where the owner of a saint weapon had died because of it. However, even though a saint weapon was condensed from Saint Qi, once it was summoned out of the body, it would become incomparably hard. Moreover, it would also become stronger as the owner's strength increased. Unless the difference in strength was too great, then a saint weapon would not be easily damaged. The middle-aged man's current strength was already at the intermediate Saint Master level, which was 2 whole levels higher than Jianshan. Although Jianshan's light wind sword and the glaive head-on would not necessarily cause too much damage to the light wind sword, the powerful recoil would still be too much for Jianshan to bear. Therefore, no matter what, Jianshan would not dare to meet the middle-aged man head-on. After all, the only one who would suffer would be himself. Once again dodging the middle-aged man's attack, the middle-aged man's defense revealed a small opening. Jianshan's eyes flashed as he took advantage of this rare opportunity. Like a ghost, Jianshan silently appeared behind the middle-aged man. The light wind sword in his hand emitted a sharp sword chi that transformed into a blood-red light as it pierced towards the middle-aged man's back. The long sword pierced through the air, creating a sharp sound as if the air itself was being sliced apart. The sword's speed was even faster than before, reaching the middle-aged man's back in an instant. But before the tip of the sword could make contact with the middle-aged man's back, the sword chi emitted from the tip of the sword had already pierced through the middle-aged man's back, piercing through his skin. Feeling the sharp pain from his back, the middle-aged man's expression changed greatly, but he didn't show any signs of panic. He was already prepared for Jinshin's extremely fast attack. Immediately, a powerful Saint Chi surged out from his body and condensed into an energy barrier on his back to block the sword. At the same time, the middle-aged man's body began to glow with a light green light. At this moment, he had already raised his speed to the limit, leaving behind a series of afterimages. Just as Jinshin's light wind sword was about to pierce his back, the middle-aged man had already moved half a meter to the side, escaping from the attack range of the light wind sword. The middle-aged man guessed that for Jinshin to be able to pierce out with such speed, he must have used all of his strength. At this moment, his defense was already at its lowest, so the middle-aged man took advantage of this rare opportunity. After dodging Jinshin's attack, he immediately raised his glaive up high. The glaive in his hand emitted a light green glow that gradually turned into a dazzling lamp under the night sky. The glaive left behind a beautiful green glow in the air as it slashed towards Jinshin at an extremely fast speed. This glaive contained the full strength of the middle-aged man's attack. After exchanging blows with Jinshin several times, the middle-aged man had already experienced how difficult it was to deal with Jinshin. With Jinshin's rich battle experience, the middle-aged man didn't leave any openings for him to take advantage of. Whether it was attacking or dodging, the middle-aged man's moves were all flawless, leaving no openings for the middle-aged man to take advantage of. But this time, the middle-aged man had borrowed Jinshin's full-strength attack to deal a heavy blow to Jinshin. Because of this, the middle-aged man didn't hold back at all. The glaive cut through the air at an extremely fast speed. If it had been someone weaker, they wouldn't even have had the time to react. Wah! With a boom, the glaive that was enveloped in a layer of azure light chopped down on Jinshin's head without any obstruction. It passed through his body and landed heavily on the ground without slowing down at all. With a boom, the glaive that contained the middle-aged man's full strength sank deeply into the ground. The powerful saint force on the glaive created a meter-wide crater in the surrounding soil. As dust flew into the air, Jinshin's figure was directly swallowed up. However, the middle-aged man did not show any joy at all. Instead, he became extremely stern. An afterimage, the middle-aged man exclaimed in his heart. However, just as this thought appeared in his mind, a strong sense of crisis spread throughout the middle-aged man's heart. The middle-aged man did not hesitate at all. His body leaned to the side with all his strength, as if it was a conditioned reflex. At the same time, he immediately pulled out the large glaive in his hand from the ground and slashed behind him without looking. Ding! With a crisp sound, the middle-aged man's large glaive collided with a thin long sword covered in blood that had suddenly appeared and clashed with it. Chapter 76. Jinshin retreated 20 meters before stopping. Now that he was no longer able to maintain his calm, his originally calm face had turned pale. After all, the difference in strength between him and the middle-aged man was simply too great. He could only rely on his movement skills to contend with the middle-aged man. When he had clashed with the middle-aged man's saint weapon, Jinshin had suffered quite a bit. Although the saint weapon was not damaged, the middle-aged man's saint chi was several times stronger than Jinshin's through the light wind sword. Jinshin's internal organs had been shaken, and he had suffered some minor injuries. The middle-aged man steadied himself and looked at Jinshin with a serious expression. Facing this person who had almost caused him to suffer 3 times in a row, the middle-aged man did not dare to underestimate him. Although the latter's strength was weak in the eyes of the middle-aged man, his speed was not any slower than his own, and his attacks were extremely fast. The middle-aged man's threat was even greater than his own opponent's. However, when the middle-aged man saw Jinshin's condition, he seemed to have understood something. He could not help but laugh and say in a deep voice, "Brat, I admit that your speed is very fast, but in the end, your strength is still too weak." As soon as he finished speaking, the middle-aged man did not give Jinshin any time to catch his breath and once again swung his 2-meter-long glaive at Jinshin. Because of the light wind sword and the middle-aged man's glaive, Jinshin had suffered some minor injuries. Although these injuries would not have been much of a hindrance to Jinshin under normal circumstances, in this battle against a middle-aged man who was 2 levels higher than him and had already reached the intermediate Saint Master level, these injuries were extremely fatal. After all, Jinshin could only rely on his profound movement skills to contend with the middle-aged man when he was in his peak condition. Now that he was injured, Jinshin could not maintain his speed and was gradually becoming more and more difficult to dodge. After exchanging a few blows with Jinshin, the middle-aged man seemed to have understood that Jinshin's threat to him had decreased by a lot. Thus, he decided to lower his guard against Jinshin and bring out all of his strength. He did not hold back at all as he attacked Jinshin with a speed that was several times faster than before. As the middle-aged man's attack speed increased, it became more and more difficult for Jinshin to dodge. If Jinshin was in his peak condition, not only would he be able to dodge the middle-aged man's attacks, he would also be able to find the time to counterattack. However, as the middle-aged man's speed increased, every time Jinshin tried to dodge the middle-aged man's attacks, it would become more and more dangerous. The middle-aged man's attack speed was extremely fast. In just a few breaths of time, he had already launched a few dozen attacks. Now that Jinshin had lost the ability to counterattack, his clothes were already filled with cracks. Traces of blood dyed the edges of the cracks red. From the small traces of blood, it could be seen that the wounds on Jinshin's body were not deep. A light cyan light flashed in the dark night. The middle-aged man's glaive seemed to be wrapped in a gust of wind as it cut through the night sky at an extremely fast speed towards Jinshin. Although Jinshin had already tried his best to dodge the glaive, he was still unable to completely dodge it due to his greatly reduced speed. The glaive left a deep wound on Jinshin's chest that was so deep that his bones could be seen. The glaive went through his entire chest, and the blood gushed out and dyed Jinshin's clothes red in a moment. The middle-aged man smiled ferociously and did not stop at all. Taking advantage of the fact that Jinshin had not pulled away from him, he immediately took a step forward to close the distance between him and Jinshin. His right foot flashed with a light cyan light as he ruthlessly kicked Jinshin's chest with lightning speed. Bam! Jinshin's body was kicked far away by the middle-aged man like a cannonball. While his body was still in the air, a mouthful of blood spurted out from Jinshin's mouth. His body flew for more than 20 meters, knocking away several bandits along the way before he fell to the ground in a sorry state. Immediately after, another mouthful of blood spurted out from Jinshin's mouth. His face had already become deathly pale. With a flash of cyan light, the middle-aged man had already crossed over 20 meters and appeared before Jinshin. He sneered at him and said, "I'll give you one last chance. If you tell me how you can display a speed that's no slower than mine with your puny strength, I'll spare your life today. Otherwise, die." The middle-aged man's eyes flickered with a scorching light. He was extremely tempted by how Jinshin could display a speed that was no slower than his with his puny strength. He desperately wanted to know how to use a secret technique like that. To him, who cultivated wind-attributed Saint Force, speed was extremely important. Once he grasped the secret technique, the middle-aged man could not imagine just how fast he would be. However, he was certain that his strength would increase drastically. At that time, his status in the Boundless Bandits would increase drastically. The middle-aged man felt his blood boil as soon as he thought up to there. He was extremely excited, and even his face became rather excited. Jinshin wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and slowly stood up. He stared coldly at the excited middle-aged man. The man could not help but sneer. "I'm afraid you don't have the ability." Even though he was quite injured, Jinshin did not show any fear towards the middle-aged man who was more powerful than him. As he said that, Jinshin made some slight adjustments to his body. He was completely relaxed now, as if he was completely defenseless. His right hand that gripped his sword loosened slightly as well. He seemed completely defenseless right now, not like he was in the middle of a battle at all. Jinshin's words caused the middle-aged man's face to darken. He coldly snorted and said, "Brat, with your current strength, you don't have the qualifications to boast like that. Since you don't want to speak, then I'll have to make you suffer." As soon as he finished speaking, the middle-aged man waved his large glaive towards Jinshin's right shoulder. Facing the middle-aged man's glaive, Jinshin did not make any movements to dodge. Instead, he raised his sword and met the glaive head-on. Although the speed of the glaive was incomparably fast, it gave people a feeling that it was as light as a feather. It was completely different from the ferocious killing intent from before. When the light wind sword and the glaive collided, there wasn't a single sound. The two weapons made contact without a single sound. The seemingly soft light wind sword was like a maggot attached to a bone as it stuck tightly to the glaive. Using a very ingenious method, it caused the glaive to deviate from its original path of attack. It circled around in the air a few times, completely removing the terrifying force from the glaive. Then, it led the glaive to the side, causing the glaive to land on the ground next to it. The middle-aged man's face slightly changed as he looked at Jinshin with a bit of surprise. This was because just a moment ago, he had actually lost control of his glaive. If such a strange thing happened to an opponent who was stronger than him, then it wouldn't be a big deal. But this time, his opponent was much weaker than him. This was something that the middle-aged man could not accept. What kind of battle skill is that? The middle-aged man asked in surprise. Tai Chi sword technique. Jinshin replied. He wasn't proficient in Tai Chi sword technique, but he had interacted with the experts of the Wu Dang sect many times in his previous life. This allowed him to gradually understand the principles behind Tai Chi sword technique. At this moment, his strength was not as good as the middle-aged man's, and he was already at the end of his rope. Jinshin had no choice but to use the Tai Chi sword technique that he wasn't proficient in to defend himself. The Tai Chi sword technique was about using softness to overcome hardness, using stillness to overcome the strong, and it also contained the ability to move 1,000 kilograms with little effort. It was indeed extremely helpful to Jinshin's current predicament. However, the only flaw was that Jinshin only had a superficial understanding of the Tai Chi sword technique. He was not proficient in it. After all, he was skilled with the sword, but even so, it was enough for Jinshin to last a while against the middle-aged man. Hearing this, the middle-aged man frowned in thought. He then shook his head slightly and murmured, "Tai Chi sword technique? I've never heard of it." Afterwards, the middle-aged man looked at Jinshin again. His eyes flickered with an indescribable light as he chuckled coldly. "Kid, I never thought that you would know so many battle skills even though you're not strong. Looks like it would be a pity to kill you with a single glaive. I should capture you and bring you back. I'm sure this would be a great contribution." With that, the middle-aged man attacked again. The glaive in his hand was filled with powerful saint force as it attacked Jinshin. He had already made up his mind to capture Jinshin today, no matter what. The middle-aged man did not pay much attention to the Tai Chi sword technique that could divert his attacks. What really interested him was Jinshin's secret technique of using speed. Afterwards, Jinshin barely managed to contend with the middle-aged man with the Tai Chi sword technique that he was not very familiar with. With the mysteries of the Tai Chi sword technique, Jinshin was able to nullify all of the middle-aged man's attacks. At the same time, the middle-aged man was unable to control his glaive due to the guidance of the Tai Chi sword technique. Before Jinshin's Tai Chi sword technique, the middle-aged man's great strength seemed to be non-existent. However, Jinshin was not as relaxed as he seemed on the surface. Although the Tai Chi sword technique allowed him to overcome hardness with gentleness, he needed to use his full strength to nullify the terrifying force of the glaive, as he had just become a saint. As a result, Jinshin seemed to be relaxed when blocking the middle-aged man's attacks, but it was actually extremely difficult. However, Jinshin could only use the Tai Chi sword technique to temporarily protect himself. He could not fight back at all. He could only block without any chance of winning. If it were not for the fact that the middle-aged man had forced him into a corner, Jianshun would never have used the Tai Chi sword technique that he was not very familiar with. After clashing with Jianshun a few times, a sliver of anger gradually appeared on the middle-aged man's face. Not only would his attacks be nullified by someone who was much weaker than him in a wondrous manner, he would even lose control over his weapon. This was definitely a humiliation to the middle-aged man. "Bastard, I don't believe that I can't do anything to you today." The middle-aged man flew into a rage out of humiliation. He finally could not help but curse. As he cursed, his attacks became even more ferocious. Chapter 77. The middle-aged man's frenzied attacks also put a lot of pressure on Jianshun. After all, Jianshun had to use his full strength to block the middle-aged man's attacks. It could be said that every time Jianshun blocked the middle-aged man's attacks, he would use up a lot of his Saint Force. Jianshun's previous battle with the middle-aged man had already used up more than half of his Saint Force. Now that he was heavily injured, Jianshun could only hold on for a short while before he started to feel a little weak. Blocking the middle-aged man's attacks was becoming more and more difficult. Jianshun had just entered the Saint realm, but he was able to contend with the middle-aged man for so long. This wasn't just because of his high level of swordsmanship, but also because of his battle experience. If it was another person with the same level of strength as Jianshun, it would be hard to say if they would be able to survive after 10 exchanges with the middle-aged man. After all, the difference in strength between a saint and a saint master was just too great. In between, there was a gap of 2 whole stages. The light green light once again streaked across the sky. When the light wind sword in Jianshun's hand came into contact with the large glaive, it was no longer possible for him to block it. The light wind sword was blocked by the large glaive, and under the pressure of the large glaive, the light wind sword was no longer under Jianshun's control. In the end, the light wind sword ruthlessly smashed into Jianshun's chest. Jianshun's body was directly sent flying, and after flying for more than 10 meters, he finally landed on the ground. A mouthful of blood uncontrollably rushed up from his throat and sprayed out from his mouth, filling the air with a bloody mist. "Brat, let's see if you still have the ability to escape from my grasp. Obediently return with me." The middle-aged man coldly laughed. Without giving Jianshun any time to catch his breath, his figure flickered, and in the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Jianshun. He extended his large hands towards Jianshun's neck. Coldly looking at the middle-aged man's rapidly approaching hands, Jianshun's eyes flashed with a sharp light. However, he sighed inwardly. "AI, looks like I can only use my last move." The last move was Jianshun's ultimate life-saving move. At the same time, it was also his only life-saving move in the Tian Yuan continent, sword manipulation. Sword manipulation was a technique that Jianshun had only comprehended after his battle with Dugu Qiubai in his previous life. He had broken through right before his death. However, just when Jianshun was about to use his ultimate move to deal with the predicament before him, a huge, fiery red sword suddenly swept through the air. It directly slashed towards the middle-aged man's hand that was reaching towards Jianshun. Glancing at the huge, fiery red sword from the corner of his eye, a sliver of disdain appeared in the middle-aged man's eyes. He gently snorted, and his hand that was reaching towards Jianshun immediately stopped. Afterward, a faint, azure light erupted from his hand, directly enveloping the middle-aged man's hand. Afterward, the middle-aged man's hand that was enveloped by azure wind-attributed Saint Force directly swung towards the incoming sword. In the end, he caught the sword firmly in his hand. Using this opportunity, Jianshun forcefully endured his heavy injuries and crawled up from the ground. He instinctively looked at the person who had saved him. Just when he was about to thank him, his eyes suddenly narrowed. The owner of the sword was a young man who seemed to be in his 20s. The young man's appearance was ordinary, the type that would stand out in a crowd. However, Jianshun was familiar with this young man. He was a mercenary that he had gotten along very well with along the way, Mu Yun. The middle-aged man sneered as he looked at Mu Yun, who held the sword. He sneered, "You overestimate yourself." A strange smile appeared on Mu Yun's face when he heard the middle-aged man's words. He gently chuckled. "You're only a mid-saint master. You're not much stronger than me, yet you dare to boast like that." As soon as he finished speaking, Mu Yun's huge, fiery red sword shone brightly. The fiery red light emitted a scorching heat. It was extremely obvious in the pitch-black night, dispersing quite a bit of the surrounding darkness. As the fiery red light grew brighter and brighter, the temperature continued to rise. In just a few breaths of time, the huge fiery red sword was wrapped in a dazzling, fiery red light. The light constantly pulsed, making it look like a sea of flames. The middle-aged man could not help but frown when he sensed the rapidly increasing temperature and the surging saint force on the sword. He then suddenly released the sword in his hand and viciously slapped the sword. Bang! Struck by the middle-aged man's powerful palm strike, Mu Yun's fiery greatsword was slapped to the side. However, Mu Yun had a certain amount of combat experience. Borrowing the strength of the greatsword, he actually turned around and made a circle in the air with the greatsword before slashing at the middle-aged man again. "Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish." The middle-aged man snorted coldly. The large glaive in his hand flashed with a light green light. Then, he waved the glaive. Under the cover of a breeze, the glaive met the fiery red greatsword at an extremely fast speed. Clang! Mu Yun's sword and the glaive collided, producing a loud clang. The two saint weapons separated as soon as they came into contact. Mu Yun staggered back more than 10 steps. On the other hand, the middle-aged man's feet seemed to have taken root in the ground. He stood there as steady as a mountain, not even swaying in the slightest. It was obvious who was stronger and who was weaker with a single glance. Jianshun, who was standing on the side, saw this scene and understood. Mu Yun's strength was slightly weaker than the middle-aged man, but he was definitely stronger than him. According to his estimation, Mu Yun's strength should be between the intermediate and advanced great saint. Even so, he was still not a match for the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's wind-attributed saint force specialized in speed. In terms of attack power, it was far inferior to Mu Yun's fire-attributed saint force. After all, the fire-attributed saint force was recognized as the most powerful attack power apart from the two rarer attributes of light and darkness. However, the middle-aged man could completely suppress Mu Yun in a head-on battle with his wind-attributed saint force. If the middle-aged man used his wind-attributed saint force to fight Mu Yun with his speed, Jianshun was certain that Mu Yun would not be able to last long in the middle-aged man's hands. If he and Mu Yun worked together to fight the middle-aged man, Jianshun was confident that the two of them would be able to hold the middle-aged man back. Unfortunately, Jianshun had been heavily injured by the middle-aged man several times. He was now heavily injured. His organs had all been severely damaged. In his current state, even standing there was an extremely difficult task for him, let alone helping out. Forcing Mu Yun to retreat with one strike, the middle-aged man's eyes flashed with murderous intent. Without giving Mu Yun time to adjust, the green light on his glaive sword. His body left behind an illusory shadow as he appeared in front of Mu Yun in the blink of an eye. He slashed at Mu Yun's head with his glaive at an extremely fast speed. The middle-aged man did not hold back at all against Mu Yun. He directly tried to kill him as soon as he arrived. After all, there was nothing on Mu Yun that could interest him. Mu Yun's expression turned solemn. He suddenly let out a roar, and the great sword in his hand instantly turned red. An even hotter temperature radiated from the great sword. At the same time, a raging flame suddenly appeared and enveloped the great sword completely. Mu Yun then swung the great sword to meet the oncoming glaive head-on. Just as Mu Yun's giant sword was swung out, it suddenly split into 3 fire snakes. 2 of them carried monstrous flames to meet the glaive, while the last fire snake rushed towards the middle-aged man's face. Boom! The glaive and the 2 fire snakes collided, and suddenly a loud sound rang out. The 2 fire snakes that were burning with monstrous flames were directly split apart by the glaive, causing sparks to fly in all directions. From afar, it looked like a beautiful flower that was blooming. It was a different kind of scenery. After dispersing the two fire snakes, the middle-aged man's glaive attack was also forcibly blocked. The third fire snake was still like a ferocious tiger, bringing along scorching heat and raging flames as it went straight for the middle-aged man's face. Just as the third snake of fire approached the middle-aged man's face, the middle-aged man suddenly released his glaive. Powerful wind attributed Saint force gathered in a single moment before he slammed his hand toward the snake of fire. When a hand collided with the snake of fire, there was a loud boom. The snake of fire was dispersed by the middle-aged man's hand, causing sparks to fly in all directions again, dispersing the darkness in the surroundings. After dispersing the snake of fire, the middle-aged man did not continue his attack. He stared at Mu Yun in surprise and cried out, "That's a battle skill. You actually know a battle skill." No one noticed that the middle-aged man's drooping right hand had become incomparably red at this moment. Moreover, in terms of size, it was also a size larger than before. Jinshin also glanced at Mu Yun in surprise when he heard the middle-aged man's words. Jinshin was no stranger to battle skills. Instead, he knew extremely well that battle skills were an extremely precious cultivation method on the Tianyuan continent. Battle skills could be used to unleash attacks that were several times, or even over 10 times more powerful than cultivation methods. They were far more precious than cultivation methods, so they were not something a normal mercenary could possess. Jinshin had never thought that Mu Yun, who seemed like a normal mercenary, would actually possess something as precious as a battle skill. It had to be mentioned that battle skills were so rare and expensive on the Tianyuan continent that even great Saint Masters could not possess them. Chapter 78. Mu Yun sneered. "You're quite knowledgeable." "That's right, it's a battle skill." The middle-aged man sucked in a deep breath as a sliver of greed immediately appeared in his gaze towards Mu Yun. Battle skills were extremely valuable on the Tianyuan continent. It was extremely difficult for regular fighters to obtain a battle skill unless they were the descendants of large clans that had been passed down for several decades, or even several centuries, or the renowned experts of the continent. Although there were a few people who managed to obtain a battle skill through pure luck, it was extremely rare for something like that to happen on the Tianyuan continent. Without great fortune and great luck, it was basically impossible for them to obtain a battle skill. Although the middle-aged man was already a mid-Saint Master and could be regarded as quite a powerful expert among the bandits, he still had not grasped a single battle skill. He had been drooling over battle skills for a very long time now, but unfortunately, he did not have the right to obtain one with his strength and status. The middle-aged man slightly moved his right hand and felt a burning pain from it. He could not help but feel no anger inside. Instead, he became excited. With his knowledge, he could tell with a single glance that Mu Yun's battle skill was quite powerful. Even though the battle skill was of the fire attribute, it was not necessarily suitable for wind-attributed Saint force. He had used it, but this did not stop the middle-aged man from being eager to obtain the battle skill. This was because battle skills were just too valuable on the Tianyuan continent. The more powerful a battle skill was, the more expensive it would be. Haha, it looks like even the heavens are looking out for me today. Kid, I'll be taking everything from you. The middle-aged man laughed out loud. The middle-aged man laughed aloud. His voice was filled with indescribable excitement. It was as if Jian Chen's secret technique and Mu Yun's battle skill were already in his grasp. How arrogant! You overestimate yourself. Mu Yun sneered and struck out first. The huge, fiery red sword in his hand pierced through the pitch-black night sky with roaring flames, stabbing toward the middle-aged man's chest. As the sword swung over, a faint, vague pressure radiated from the sword, filling the surroundings. However, the pressure was extremely faint, so faint that it was almost undetectable. However, to Jianshun, who was already extremely powerful as a god, the faint pressure was still clearly sensed by him. When he sensed the source of the pressure, the surprise in his eyes became even heavier. The middle-aged man sneered as he watched the sword approach him with a powerful presence. He said, "Kid, you may be skilled in battle skills, but you're still a little too weak." As soon as his voice fell, Just as the fiery red greatsword was about to touch the clothes on the middle-aged man's chest, the middle-aged man's figure suddenly disappeared like a ghost, causing Mu Yun's greatsword to miss. Seeing the middle-aged man disappear before his eyes, Mu Yun's face sank slightly. However, at this moment, an ear-piercing shriek came from behind. Without thinking, Mu Yun's huge sword immediately turned into 3 fire serpents and swung backward. In midair, the 3 fire serpents strangely fused into one, forming a fire serpent that was twice as large as the first one. Clang! With the sound of metal clashing, a large amount of sparks flew out from where the 2 of them clashed, directly submerging their bodies. Afterwards, a ring of fiery red ripples spread out from where the 2 of them clashed, rapidly expanding to a radius of over 10 meters. When the fiery red ripples swept past Jian Chen's body, the heat that still hadn't dissipated from the flames burned Jian Chen's coarse clothes black. If it weren't for the fact that Jian Chen's clothes were covered in blood, keeping them slightly moist, his clothes would probably have been set ablaze already. Mu Yun and the middle-aged man retreated from the flames in a rather messy manner. The 2 of them seemed to be in a rather horrible shape. Mu Yun's neatly tied hair had become extremely messy while his face was pale. The fire-red sword in his right hand had become dim as well. On the other hand, the middle-aged man was wrapped in powerful wind-attributed saint force. Quite a few places on his clean clothes had become black spots from the flames. Only half of his sleeves remained. Due to the use of battle skills, the disturbance created by Mu Yun and the middle-aged man's battle was much greater than Jinchen's. The large swathe of sparks immediately attracted quite a few mercenaries. Immediately, the mercenaries and bandits who were still fighting glanced in the direction of the battle. When they saw the large swathe of sparks, a few of the more knowledgeable mercenaries could not help but cry out. Those are actually tangible flames. It's impossible to create tangible flames without reaching Earth Saint Master. That's a battle skill. A battle skill. It's actually a battle skill. There's actually someone who knows a battle skill. Whether it was the mercenaries or the bandits, all of them cried out when they recognized Mu Yun's battle skill. Their gazes were filled with shock and disbelief. After all, battle skills were just far too rare and expensive on the Tianyuan continent. A few weaker mercenaries would probably never be able to see a battle skill in action in their entire lives. After their surprise, greed flickered in the eyes of most of the mercenaries and bandits. On the Tianyuan continent, battle skills were the things that every fighter coveted and desired the most. Their desire for battle skills far exceeded the desire for cultivation techniques. This was because battle skills could allow one to unleash attacks that were several times or even 10 times more powerful than one's own strength. On the Tianyuan continent, where strength was everything and where slaughter was everywhere, possessing a battle skill would give one an additional layer of protection. Jian Chun could not help but frown when he saw the greed in the eyes of the mercenaries and bandits. A man's wealth was his own ruin. He understood this principle better than anyone else. Mu Yun possessing a battle skill had completely exceeded his expectations. Now that Mu Yun's battle skill had been exposed before so many mercenaries, it would definitely bring him endless trouble with how precious battle skills were on the Tianyuan continent. It was even possible for him to lose his life because of it. After all, Mu Yun was still far too weak right now. Jinshin could not help but worry for Mu Yun's future. Although he had not known Mu Yun for very long and could only be regarded as strangers who had met by chance, Jinshin understood that Mu Yun had become embroiled in the battle with the middle-aged man in order to save him, thus exposing his battle skill. The middle-aged man stared at Mu Yun with a burning gaze and said with a deep voice, "What a powerful battle skill. You can actually block my full-powered strike as a great saint." When he spoke up to hear, the middle-aged man's voice paused for a moment. Then, the corners of his lips revealed a hint of a sneer, saying, "Even though you can temporarily display the power of a sacred expert through combat skills, this isn't your own strength in the end. I want to see how long you can last." With that, the middle-aged man raised his glaive high into the air. Just when he was about to attack Mu Yun again, several powerful presences suddenly appeared in the distance. The middle-aged man beamed with joy when he sensed the powerful presences that had suddenly appeared. In his opinion, the experts on his side had already killed the experts of the mercenary group and had come to reinforce them. At the end of the darkness in the distance, several black figures were running towards them at an extremely fast speed. In just a breath's time, the faces of the black figures appeared in everyone's line of sight. When they saw the faces of those figures, all the mercenaries immediately cheered loudly. It's the captain. The captain and the others have returned. Captain Lang Tian. Captain Lang Tian has returned victorious. It's Captain Xiao. They killed the experts of the Boundless Bandits. There were a total of 5 people who had returned. Every one of them had wounds of various sizes on their bodies. With the help of the flickering flames not far away, one could vaguely see that their clothes were stained with blood. There were also several corpses on their shoulders. The middle-aged man and the bandits who were still fighting with the mercenaries immediately turned grim when they heard the thunderous cheers of the mercenaries. Then, the middle-aged man suddenly turned his head and stared at Captain Xiaoho and the others who had returned. His eyes were filled with disbelief. You, how did you all come back alive? The middle-aged man swallowed his saliva with difficulty and said in disbelief. When he saw this scene, the middle-aged man knew that the experts in his camp had most likely met with misfortune. Otherwise, the ones who returned would not be the mercenaries, but the experts in his camp. The middle-aged man's words attracted the attention of the 5 mercenaries who had returned. Then, the 5 of them slowly put down the corpses on their shoulders and looked at the middle-aged man with murderous eyes. Sensing the strong, murderous intent from the 5 of them, the middle-aged man was shocked. Without hesitation, he immediately shouted, "The situation is not good. Everyone retreat." Before he could finish speaking, the middle-aged man put away his glaive and retreated as fast as he could in a flash of light green light. Although the 5 experts who had returned were quite injured, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Moreover, there were 5 of them. The middle-aged man had no confidence in winning against them. As soon as the middle-aged man moved, 2 of the 5 experts who had just returned immediately chased after him. Hearing the middle-aged man's words, the bandits who were still struggling to hold on immediately abandoned their opponents and fled in all directions as if they had been granted amnesty. "Kill. Leave no one alive," as one of them ordered. The remaining mercenaries immediately strode forward and chased after the remaining members of the Boundless Bandits with all their might. These mercenaries hated the Boundless Bandits to the core. How could they let them leave so easily? Not only had the experts in their camp been defeated by the mercenaries, but even the middle-aged man, who was the only one who could speak, had fled. At this moment, the members of the Boundless Bandit group had lost their will to fight. They only cared about escaping, and they didn't even have the courage to fight anymore. On the other hand, the mercenaries' morale had soared after seeing their leaders and experts defeat the experts of the Boundless Bandit group. Even those who were originally exhausted suddenly had an inexhaustible supply of energy as they pursued the fleeing bandits with all their might. Shouts and screams filled the night, but they soon quieted down. Under the leadership of the 3 experts, more than half of the remaining bandits were killed by the mercenaries. Only a few of them managed to escape. "We won. We won. We defeated the Boundless Bandits. We defeated the Boundless Bandits." Chapter 79. At this moment, 2 black figures quickly ran over from afar. Very soon, they stopped in front of a group of mercenaries. The 2 of them were the mercenaries who had chased after the middle-aged man. The 2 of them were middle-aged men in their 30s or 40s. Their faces were covered in blood, and their bodies were covered in wounds. Their tattered clothes had been dyed red with blood, and their resolute faces were pale. However, their bright eyes were still brimming with energy. Seeing how the 2 of them returned empty-handed, it was obvious that they had failed to catch up to the middle-aged man. "Sigh, that person possesses wind-attributed Saint Force, so he has a huge advantage in terms of speed. Even though we're stronger than him, we can't catch up to him at all in our current state. He managed to escape in the end," one of them said helplessly. "Whatever, let him escape. I never thought that he would actually be from the Boundless Bandits. No wonder he's so powerful." If it weren't for the help of a mysterious expert, we probably wouldn't have been able to make it back alive. It's already extremely fortunate that we managed to keep our lives this time, said a burly middle-aged man. The one who spoke was a tall and sturdy middle-aged man. Under the illumination of the fire, one could vaguely see that the skin on his face was rather tanned. Upon hearing the middle-aged man's words, the expressions of the other mercenaries who had gone to kill the boundless bandits changed slightly. There was actually a hint of relief and lingering fear in their eyes. Captain Lang Tian, are you all right? At this moment, a mercenary arrived before the middle-aged man and asked in concern. The middle-aged man, called Captain Lang Tian, lowered his head slightly when he heard that. He looked at his wounds and shook his head gently. I'm fine. I can still hold on. With that, the middle-aged man glanced at the mercenaries on his shoulders. He let out a long sigh as sorrow flashed through his eyes. He said with a heavy voice, It's a pity that Mu Yun Bai, De He, and the captain of the desert mercenaries have all died to the hands of the boundless bandits. Many of the mercenaries became filled with sorrow when they heard that, especially the members of the desert mercenaries. Their hearts were extremely heavy. However, to the mercenaries who often roamed the Tian Yuan continent and lived on the edge of the blade, who knew how many times they had experienced something like this, they had already become accustomed to it, so they calmed down very quickly. Brothers, although we have successfully forced the boundless bandit group to retreat, we have only encountered a small group of them this time. If we were to encounter their large group or elite group, we would definitely have no chance of survival. Therefore, it is not wise to stay here for long. Everyone, immediately count the casualties and bury the brothers who have died in battle. After that, we will hurry through the night and leave this place immediately, Commander Lang Tian said loudly. Hearing this, the mercenaries immediately became busy. Among them, the mercenaries who were more heavily injured were escorted away to be treated with medicine. As for those who were strong and not heavily injured, they were all arranged to dig holes and move the corpses. Everyone busied themselves silently. A strange silence filled the entire campsite. At that moment, no one said anything. They all silently went about their own business. The atmosphere was extremely heavy. Jinshin glanced around and sighed inside. Although they had achieved the final victory against the boundless bandits, it had been a Pyrrhic victory. After the battle, the combined strength of the three mercenary groups had been drastically reduced. Their numbers had been reduced from several hundred to less than 100. They were less than a third of their original strength. Only 5 of the dozen or so experts who had charged out had returned, and all of them were injured. Their battle prowess had plummeted. Even the captain of one of the mercenary groups had died in the battle against the boundless bandits. Jinshin, are you all right? Are your wounds heavy? At this moment, a rather familiar voice rang out in Jinshin's head. When Jinshin heard that, he turned around and saw that Mu Yun had appeared behind him at some point in time. The person who had spoken was Mu Yun. Mu Yun's current condition was not very good. His face was sickly pale. His previous confrontation with the middle-aged man had not been as easy as it seemed on the surface. Although his combat skills had allowed him to unleash his strength, with his current strength, using combat skills would put a huge burden on his body. Jinshin shook his head gently and said, I'm fine. Jinshin paused and looked at Mu Yun with a complicated gaze. He said softly, Mu Yun, your combat skills have been discovered by many mercenaries. You should be careful along the way. Once you reach a safe place, leave this caravan as soon as possible. Otherwise, I'm afraid that some of them will do something to harm you. With Jinshin's words, Mu Yun glanced at the mercenaries who were busy in the surroundings and chuckled. Jinshin, thank you for your kind reminder. I will be careful. Although he said that, Mu Yun didn't seem worried at all. It was as if he didn't care about these mercenaries at all. Jinshin's heart skipped a beat as he stared at Mu Yun's calm face. He seemed to be in thought. Jinshin did not believe that Mu Yun was strong enough to protect himself in the mercenary group with the strength he had displayed against the middle-aged man. After all, Mu Yun took out a white porcelain bottle from his space ring and passed it to Jinshin. He said, This is good medicine for healing. Take it orally and use it externally. Take it and treat your injuries. Thank you. Jinshin did not refuse. He directly extended his hand and accepted the bottle from Mu Yun. "You're welcome. Go treat your injuries first. I'll go do some things for them as well." With that, Mu Yun left. 2 hours later, the entire caravan was cleaned up. The mercenaries who had died in the battle were all buried in a large pit. Not a single person from the Boundless Bandits paid any attention to them. Their corpses were still strewn across the ground. The mercenaries hated the Boundless Bandits so much that no one would bother to collect their corpses. During the 2 hours, Jianshin had roughly treated his injuries. He had also changed out of his clothes that had become tattered from the battle with the middle-aged man. Before they set off, Jianshin had prepared over a dozen sets of clothes in his space ring, so he did not have to worry about not being able to find a change of clothes. Set off. Once everything was ready, the entire caravan set off again under the orders of one of the leaders. They were prepared to travel through the night without any rest. After the attack by the Boundless Bandits, the caravan no longer dared to stay in the area, not even for a moment longer. After the battle with the Boundless Bandits, the caravan's defenses had been drastically weakened. They no longer had the strength to deal with the upcoming battle. After all, quite a few of the bandits had managed to escape. If the caravan did not leave, they would be surrounded by a large group of bandits before long. At that time, they would really be powerless to turn the situation around. Jianshan climbed onto his mount with great difficulty and followed the caravan through the night. Jianshan closed his eyes as he silently circulated his saint force to heal his wounds. After being struck by the middle-aged man a few times, Jianshin was quite heavily injured. At the same time, he had consumed far too much saint force. Even the most basic movements were rather difficult for him right now, let alone battle. On the Tianyuan continent, where danger could come at any time, strength was the most important thing. As a result, Jianshan did not dare to rest for even a single moment. He worked hard to recover his strength. The caravan moved forward quickly on the official road. As everyone was worried that the Boundless Bandits' reinforcements would catch up with them, they moved several times faster than before. Even so, they were only a little faster than an ordinary person running at full speed. After all, there were carts full of goods, so it was impossible to speed up even if they wanted to. Even at their current speed, they almost overturned their carts several times when they passed through some bumpy roads. Jinshin's eyes remained closed as he circulated his saint force to slowly heal his wounds. Due to the environment, Jinshin did not dare to focus on healing at all. As a result, his extremely heavy wounds healed at a snail's pace. Jinshin could not help but think of his mother, Bai Yuntian. He could still clearly remember how he had injured his third brother, Changyang Ku, a few years ago in Changyang Prefecture. Bai Yuntian had healed Changyang Ku effortlessly without even leaving behind a single scar. If a Radiant Saint Master was present right now, it would probably be much easier for him to heal. Unfortunately, there are just far too few Radiant Saint Masters, and they possessed extremely great statuses. It was impossible for the three mercenary groups to invite them over with their current strength. Just as Jianshan thought of a Radiant Saint Master, a thought suddenly flashed through his head. He suddenly opened his eyes, and the moment he opened them, a resplendent light shot out from his eyes. All right, I can sense Radiant Saint Force and absorb it. I wonder if I can control Radiant Saint Force to heal myself like a Radiant Saint Master, Jianshan thought to himself. As soon as he thought about how it was very likely that he could control Radiant Saint Force like a Radiant Saint Master, his heart immediately surged with excitement. He was unable to control his joy.